Good evening, and welcome to the January 7th, 2019 meeting of the Merrimack School Board. If you could please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which is one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item number 2 on tonight's agenda is public participation. If anyone from the public would like to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Rich Quinn, it's on. It's all right. You guys can hear me. Yeah? Is this on? There we go. All right. Rich Quinn, 10 Wire Road. I don't want to go too long, but I'm new to the school board stuff. I've been to 2 meetings, so I am not super knowledgeable about stuff, and I don't want to come up here and stir the pot on some things that I have been frustrated about and be insulting to anyone. So I'm just sort of apologizing if I say something that is not true, because I really am not super knowledgeable about all the goings on here. So I brought this up, and if I need to have time on a next meeting, then I could do that. I mean, I read some of the rules. Public participation is only supposed to be a certain amount of time. But it's about planning and money, especially about the construction costs that I've been hearing from you guys. It's been super frustrating for me. So in the 2 meetings, there was some quite a bit of talk about the roofing, which is extremely expensive. I've done quite a bit of research in the past couple weeks, past month, about the roofing expenses, and all of my contractors that I've spoken with, as well as my suppliers, we're paying too much for the roofing. And one of my suppliers was like, yeah, Garland and Trimco basically own the commercial market for schools, and they've got a lock-in on overpriced roofing. I did a little bit of a web search on it. You guys more than welcome to do so. It was pretty interesting, some of the videos about it. And the reason why I bring it up is because Peter Duke, who right there at the library a few years ago, asked me about helping out with the roof. And I went up there with my dad, who I think I stated at a couple board meetings ago is a mechanical and structural engineer. He did commercial building inspections for about 20 years. I told Peter, I said, we can do an inspection for you and give you a report. At that time, he came back to me and said, no, we've got a company that's going to do it for free, which was Garland. And what is happening, one of the things that's happening is Garland is putting in their specifications, and their specifications lock in their product. So right now we're getting a no bid roofing job, labor only. The products are locked in based on the specifications which were provided by the manufacturer, and they're overcharging by up to 3 times. So you're paying, if we're doing 11 acres worth of roofing, you're talking about the rate is about $16 million. And I'm pretty sure we get comparable roofing at the same warranty for about $8 million. It's that much. We're not talking about little money here. We're talking about a lot of money. And I'm not up here pitching for work. I don't even want to do it. I don't do roofing. I'm just like, this is not, it's $5,000 slipped through the cracks. This is big money. Big money. And we're talking about 4 teachers getting fired next year or let go or whatever it is because of budgets, and we're overpaying our roofing something was said about
I will clarify your statement for sake of accuracy. It's based on enrollments.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, but teachers are being lost. I started coming here for a turf field. I don't want to see any teachers. Whatever. it's overcharged. We're getting overcharged for our roofing, plain and simple. There's no question about it. Okay, if you look up Garland lawsuit, you're going to find out it's not just the town of Merrimack, it's the state of Pennsylvania is suing Garland. The state of California, states are suing this company for scam practices on overcharge of roofing, right? So when I get back to planning, one of the things that was said by Tom, the head of maintenance, I think it was Brandy mentioned, why don't we have a professional walk the roof? Which I think is a great idea. Tom said, and he said, I walk the roof twice a year with my vendor, which means he's walking the roof with his salesperson who's trying to sell him product, not a unbiased professional who would give this town the right advice for the taxpayer that would be prudent for the money spent. It's somebody who's trying to meet his quota walking that roof, which is, in my mind, unacceptable. So I'm not going to get into that topic. So that all frustrates me because it's not like, oh, a little bit of money slipped across. We're talking about real money here, real money, millions of dollars over the course of the amount of roofing we're talking about. And then all the while, Tom talks about boilers, 2 boilers in Master Cole that need to be replaced. Boilers in those size buildings, knowing the construction industry, having a dad who was a commercial building inspector, they are vastly expensive. Oftentimes, those types of boilers are built into the building, can't be removed, can't be installed. Oftentimes, those rooms are decommissioned because of asbestos. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars for boilers. So now we're talking about another construction project, which is going to be super expensive. I don't know who made the decisions on the roofing, but we're going to spend top dollar. If we're going to go out and buy an S600 Mercedes roofing, and we're going to have to do boilers, 2 boilers in a huge building that's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to upgrade. And we're talking about a warranty for a roof of 40 years. And we're not talking about solar on 11 acres of roofing or something like that. That's a failure of planning, So we're talking about spending a ton of money on boilers, a ton of money on roofing, but we're not planning for what would be good. I mean, we don't know. Oil's cheap right now. It's great. Burn it and get it done. But 5 years from now, 6 months from now, 10 years from now, we're talking 40 years for a roof that's not prepped for anything. That goes back to the planning. And I'm going to switch topics here because it comes back to, I've said enough about overcharge on the roofing. I'm going to switch topics to the turf field. The track down there is beautiful. I love it. You guys should be proud of that it was done. I'd love to see the turf field be done. But and I know it's not your guys' responsibility to do the planning, but I feel like in the little bit of effort that I've put in and been around, there's no plan for the overall scope of work to really do it right. We can throw some turf down, but then what about the field house? What about the netting? What about, extra space for, JV players? All the little things that could go into a master plan for the athletic field. So I'm actually still doing this project for this homeowner. It's a homeowner. He's a surgeon. His wife's a doctor. They make tons of money. Came to me for a screen porch deck addition. He said, do you think we can do it for $150,000? Now this is in Massachusetts. He's got tons of money. I'm like, yeah, we can do it for that. We're at $750,000 on that job, and we're still not done. Now he's got an elevator in there and all kinds of stuff, and he's spending money like crazy. But mostly, he's probably got $200,000 of construction costs wasted out of lack of planning. He knows it. He's frustrated about it, but It's his personal money. So that's just an analogy. So what I'd like to see, what Brandy said about a professional, and I'm not trying to pitch my dad's company, which was Commercial Building Consultants out of Orlando. He's retired anyways. But I think it would be prudent of this town and the school system to say, let's spend over the next 3 years or whatever, $50,000 to get unbiased professionals in to do a scope of work, what needs to get done, get the specifications that aren't in from a company that has vested interest in selling that product, all that kind of stuff. So we know, hey, do we want to look at putting in, if we're going to put in $16 million worth of roofing, are we going to put stanchions and get engineering in before that so we can support the weight of solar? Because that might be more cost efficient to get electrical and heat out of all that flat roof, and get a plan put together. Because what's happening right now in 2 school board meetings is you're ripping through that money, going from $150,000 screen porch deck addition to $750,000, and it's taxpayer money. It would be much better. I just did a project in Merrimack, and I said, yep, all set. It was a friend of mine had to sell it. He had a home inspection, came back. I missed a bunch of stuff, and I do this for a living. I was like, oh yeah, we'll go fix it. But it was somebody else who hadn't seen the project, was looking at it. And I was like, yeah, we'll put this, do that, bing, bang, boom, done. That would be really good for this town, for all these big buildings, you know? So we know, hey, this boiler, if we put in a couple of beams before we do the roof system, because it's going to be cheaper to do a rooftop heating and cooling system, it's going to cost you less money than trying to replace that infrastructure, that archaic infrastructure that's stuck in that building. Decommission the room. Or, hey, no, it's better to do it this way, and we can do a multi-stage boiler system with heat pumps on the rooftop, and get somebody who knows, get a whole system together for this, because it's millions of dollars here we're talking about. And that's really all I have to say. So I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm just like, we got to get a plan together for this, all this stuff, especially construction. It's very expensive. I know, I bill people all the time. So if there's anything that I can do, I'd be more than happy to help. If there was companies that you want me to, I could talk to my dad about companies that are still in this realm of doing commercial inspections. You get investors who are looking at a $20 million property, and they find out they've got $10 million of infrastructure. They've got to do the building right away. It means it's a $30 million property. There are these big numbers going on with these big buildings. I think that would be something that would be very important for the school system. It would spend money, but you would save a lot of money in the long run. And I hope that you all look at the Garland issues and really, find out whether that's what we really want to do in this town, spend that kind of money. So, and I am not going to stay for the rest of the meeting. I looked at the agenda, and there's not too much I want to look at. I appreciate you guys for your time being here and listening to me, and I hope I didn't insult anyone. And
Thank you, Mr. Gwynn. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak under public participation? Going once, going twice. Seeing none, we will close public participation. I'm on to item number 3, which is the outcome to inquiry regarding pooling school district employees with town employees for health insurance rates. I invite to the table Debbie Clayton, our Health Trust Benefits Coordinator, and welcome. If you'd be so kind as to introduce your colleague. Probably not.
Good evening. As was mentioned, I'm Debbie Clayton, the school district's benefits coordinator from Health Trust, and with me this evening is Melissa Briggs, the assistant benefits manager, also from Health Trust.
Good evening, everyone.
Can you hear me okay? Is the volume okay? Okay. Okay. Just for those folks in the room or in the audience that aren't familiar, Health Trust is a nonprofit public sector risk pool who works to provide high-quality, cost-effective employee benefits to New Hampshire public sector employers and employees. In November, I received an inquiry from the district asking if there might be any potential cost savings if the school district and the town of Merrimack joined together to form a larger pool for the purpose of setting medical rates. At Health Trust, we offer a type called combination of entities. This allows school districts and the towns in their community to explore the financial impact of forming a larger pool. Letters of interest were requested of and received from each interested party. At this point, the Health Trust underwriter combined the claims experience of the school district and the town and generated a proposal. This proposal was for informational or illustrative purposes only. The time period in which was used to set this informational proposal was the guaranteed maximum rate time period. For folks like yourselves that have an anniversary in July, it's a two-step process where we set a guaranteed maximum rate in October or not to exceed, so that you have numbers for budgeting, and then in the spring we revisit those numbers. And they can come down, but they won't get any higher than what's issued in the month of October. Another point to make is that currently 92% of what is billed to the district in terms of your rates is based on your own claims utilization. That's for all of Health Trust member groups that are considered large, and for our purposes, anyone considered large is over 50 eligible employees. In October, the district's guaranteed maximum rate increase was 13.7%. When looking at the illustrative proposal, combining with the town of Merrimack, that would have come in at an 18.8% increase. So a little bit more than 5% higher if, in fact, you were combined with the town for rating purposes. When looking at two Health Trust member groups interested in a combination proposal, I think it's very important that we look at each individual group first in terms of determining what's your starting point for each separate member group. For example, where are your current rate levels, meaning how high are your current single, two-person, and family rates for all of your benefits that you offer, as well as what's your claims experience looking at, what's your loss ratio looking at, are you running high, mid, low, good, poor, etc. So where you start also has a huge impact on where you're looking at once you generate the proposal. So during the exercise, it is common for the rates of one entity to increase and the other to decrease, bringing them to a common rate level. Depending on how large the rate changes are, it may or may not be financially beneficial for the member groups to enter a combination of entities agreement. And now the district has the information that was sent for you to explore. The town also has exactly the same information for the town side of the illustrative proposal. And at this point, I welcome any and all questions about what you have received and had a chance to review.
Okay, I see Andy's hand up.
So, thanks for the information. I think actually I'm going to lean in this, not in your direction, but in this direction, because I was the one that actually proposed this. And the intent wasn't to say what would it do to the school district's side of the house in terms of cost, but the overall to the taxpayers if you combine the entities. Mm-hmm. A logical person would assume that we're bringing a higher risk pool in to the school districts, and therefore the increase for the school side could go up. The missing piece for me is the other side that we're not seeing, which is how much does it go down, and does the overall rate that a taxpayer would pay drop, stay the same, or go up? Because the whole point here is not for me to let's combine because it's the right thing to do. Is it the most cost efficient way to do it? So I don't know whether we have the ability to know what the town side is, if this is something we have to have a joint meeting about, because for me, my stance on whether we combine is based off of what the overall cost savings would be. So
I can answer that. However, I do think I want to answer it very carefully in the fact that it's, it would be recommended that you do have a joint conversation with the town to talk about the implications. But just solely based on each proposal, if you were in fact to be a combination of entities, if everything was exactly the same as it is at the time of setting this proposal, all enrollments, all benefit offerings, et cetera, the overall for the community would cost more if in fact you were combined.
That's clarity we were looking for. So, the question I really had was, knowing that this could always be a changing dynamic. I know our rates change annually for a reason. So to that end, how often is this exercise recommended to see if there's actual opportunity to save money to the taxpayer?
If this is something you truly would believe in entering into in the future, if in fact it was to benefit the entire community, we'd be more than willing to do this annually.
And then there's a part B to that. If this year it doesn't benefit us, next year it does benefit us, but the year after it doesn't, how long are we locked into these? How much fun do you want to have, Debbie? That's really the question with our numbers.
Once you enter a combination of entities agreement, you're locked in for 5 years.
Okay, that's exactly the question I had. So thank you for that. And Cinda?
Are there any other communities that you work with that have done this and it's worked out for them over the long term? Or is this kind of an unusual situation to combine in this way?
I might actually turn to Melissa because I don't currently have any groups that are doing this. Don't have any combination of entities, member groups. However, we have several. I don't individually.
We haven't had any combine, and the combinations that we have currently have been combined for quite some time now, but not really any new combinations. So it really depends on a group by group basis, and their claims experience, the loss ratio, like what we're collecting for the premiums for groups. We do have some groups, if we looked at them individually, they have benefited over the time. And that's why when they started out with this same process on an illustrative basis, looking at it, and it did benefit them, and that's why they did combine. I think we have, if I recall, about 12 combinations with the towns and the school systems in place. Correct, in the state. But initially, it absolutely benefited them, and that's why they did it.
And so we're going to respectfully decline. I think that we can say that by consensus. But the thing I would say, if we do go to do this again as a board, the clarity I would say is we just came out of negotiations. And those negotiated rates were based on the numbers of the GMR were calculated into what we did for negotiations with our staff. So I think the timeliness of when we do that will be before going into negotiations if we do this in the future. So that way we're not negotiating one rate and then having them, especially knowing that we were the quote unquote losing entity going up 5% by a large margin. It would go straight through to the employee as well. So we'd be dinging the employee by doing this after negotiations, and that's not really the spirit in which we want to work with our staff. So with that, timing is everything, right? You're allowed to have a question, and you can have the floor.
So we're talking about costs here. Are there any other benefits to combining besides just the cost aspect?
Well, in your particular instance, you would be creating a pool, if you will, that would be 100% credible. So a big part of the rate setting process is determining how credible you folks are. And we don't see a member group truly credible unless you have 1,000 or more eligible covered lives. So as a very large school district, a large impact of your own claims is yours. The town on the other side is less credible. There is smaller credibility, but together you exceed 1,000. So you would be completely on your own for the rate setting process. So if going forward in the future, if in a team effort you could work together on consumerism and working on wellness and Smart Shopper and all those things, and together could make claims more favorable, which, as we know, we've been at this table before, you can't always predict what claims will do based on how active and how much participation you have. But that would be the one benefit, is you would truly be on your own. So in the whole method between the school district and the town would be, we are all in this together because we are on our own. That would be the only benefit, because you continue to have your own independent individual selection of benefits, but you would have exactly the same rate levels. So everything remains independent in terms of your choices and how you set up your benefits with your unions, et cetera, but you would just have exactly the same rate levels.
So where we have committees within the district to help with promoting all those sorts of things you just described. In order to really see any benefits, we'd have to create something that would span all the different entities in the town to work to promote, to help create that mindset. Because right now we sort of are separate, and I know on the school side we've done a lot of work to really increase the wellness and the different committees and things like that. So if we truly wanted to investigate this in the future and reap some of the benefits you just described, we'd have to really get the town to participate in the same level of vigor and rigor or whatever.
Right. More
to
of a
do that.
team effort.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Seeing none, we thank you for the work you put in.
You're welcome.
Again, it's work that's not going to create a new policy, but we thank you again for all the support you provide us. And I know healthcare cost containment is on Wednesday, and I will see you there.
You'll be
Thank you.
seeing me. I'll have to fill in.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, I'm coming. See
Well,
ya.
I look forward to it. We'll try to match the same colors. Excellent. Thanks. And item number 4 is the explanation of the fire engineer's report regarding the Brentwood building, which is the red building on our campus. So I invite to the table our fire captain, John Manueli. So welcome, John. Yes, oh, absolutely. I'm sorry, Matt, and I think I forgot to call on you.
That's okay. They're
Yep.
off on their
So
own. They
I
can-
apologize.
That's
So.
fine. This report was based upon a conversation and an extensive walkthrough that the fire marshal, myself, Tom Tussaud, building inspector, I believe, was there, building official, yeah, Rick Jones, had when we took a walkthrough of the Brentwood building. And the recommendation from the fire marshal, John Manueli here, was to have an electrical engineer go through, an electrical fire protection engineer, thank you for that clarification, go through and look at this building as a whole and give recommendations. I received this, I looked through it, and I says, oh my gosh, I am way in over my head because I don't understand but half of this right here. So John is kind enough to just kind of come here and give an explanation, not specific detail of all the codes and everything like that, but just an overview to give you a sense of what this. Is that correct, John? Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Test. I'm not a fire protection engineer, nor do I play one on TV. So that's why I recommended that we bring an expert in. The report looks terrifying, but it's really not as bad as it seems. And I guess I want to start with a little background on the school. I actually did some research on the school itself because I wanted to familiarize myself with it. And I found a lot of interesting stuff in the files. The building initially was a single-family home built in 1963. And up until 1979, that's what it was. In 79, the Ceres Company, which is Southeast Regional Education Services, purchased the building with the intention of using it as a school for troubled children for 12 different communities, including Merrimack. They put additions on in 1986, 1997, and 1999. I found reports in the files for all of those. The interesting thing is that the square footage of the additions doesn't add up to the square footage of the building, including the original home. So either the additions were bigger than initially thought, or there was other additions that are not in the files, which I thought was rather interesting. And the other thing is, not one of the files indicates that the state fire marshal's office actually reviewed any of the additions or anything, which currently all schools, anything that's done on the schools, as Matt knows, when we put the front additions or the front entrances on the different schools, that has to go through the state. Sprinkler and fire alarm has to go through the state. So somewhere along the line, none of this was done. And I don't know why. I don't know how that happened. It was well before my time involved in this. The construction of the building itself is basically to a home standard, 2x4 construction, that type of thing. It's not built to a standard of a school would be today. And in fact, the report basically says that it's a Class 5 construction, which basically means wood frame unprotected building. There was also a note that I found where the building was originally in 1986. The fire department recommended a sprinkler system be installed in the building, a full sprinkler system. Somewhere along the line, it became a basement sprinkler system with an alarm and more exits, which at the time was allowed. Today, it would not be allowed. It would have to have a full sprinkler system within the building. That's pretty much what I was able to find out through our records, from the building department records. And that brings us pretty much to today. The school was in use by Ceresc up until 2014, at which point they decided they were no longer going to be using it, and Nashua Public School took over the use of the school for 2 years. It's been vacant since, I believe it was vacated, July of 2016, I believe, is when it was actually vacant, plus 17. I thought it was 17.
Your mic's off. Sorry.
Nashua used it up until June of 2018. The lease, they did year-by-year leases of it, so.
Okay, so
And
they
we
extended
we
the lease.
took ownership in mid-July after they had vacated, so.
Okay. So at this point, like I said, we initially went over to look at the school as possibly using it for classroom space. And our initial comment with Matt was it would need a lot of work to be used for classroom space because it doesn't meet the current code. And because we are now the owners, as the town of Merrimack owns it, we have to bring it up to the current code. A lot of the issues with the school are maintenance related. There was just a lot of maintenance that was not done or was done very shoddy. There's some rot on the outside of the building. The emergency ramp, or the ramp for handicap access, is absolutely terrible. There's just a lot of stuff like that that needs to be done. And a lot of if you go through the report little by little, were there specific questions that you had on the report, Matt?
I was thinking about the fire alarm panels, smoke alarms, everything like that, all upgraded, replaced.
Right. So the alarm system is old, to say the least. It is apparently functional based on the report, but there's different issues with ADA compliance. The height of the pull stations is not correct for ADA compliance. The panel itself is an old panel. The thing with fire alarms is they build in a planned obsolescence for them. After about 10 years, they say you can't get parts for them anymore, which forces you to buy a newer fire alarm panel. This is throughout the entire industry, and that panel is probably closing in on 10 years old, if not already there. So a new panel would be required, and some upgrading of the alarm system would be required, even as a business occupancy, which the engineer actually inspected it to make it into a business occupancy.
Yeah. So this wouldn't be acceptable for any classroom school use.
Correct.
Unless there were a complete fire alarm.
Realistically,
upgrade?
today's code would
Realistic?
require the building to be sprinkled to be used as classroom use.
Yeah,
That would be the
fully
big
fully
thing.
sprinkled.
Fully
yes.
sprinkled building. Right now, there's a partial sprinkler in the basement,
Correct.
which is not acceptable by today's standards.
Right.
But a full sprinkler system would be required, and an upgrade of the fire alarm to
Okay.
current.
But if we wanted to occupy it for another not casual,
Business use,
business
business
use,
classification.
sprinkler wouldn't be required. I don't believe
Correct.
we have those in our office now, so they wouldn't be required. But
Correct.
the fire alarm panel and the fire alarm
Which it would
strobes,
need to be upgraded. Strobes, pull stations, smoke detectors, all of
yeah,
those would be upgraded.
and then the
to current.
ADA piece with the
Just a matter of relocating the pull stations. You'd be putting new pull stations
Yeah.
on anyway, and they would just put them in the proper heights.
And this doesn't talk to the ADA accessibility of the building, but I know the ramps were
Yep.
not acceptable and the railings weren't the right height. So all those code issues, there were holes in the walls and there
Yep.
were some holes in the suspended ceiling.
Yep.
Everything would have to be
It would have to be brought up, yes.
brought up to.
Basically, like I said, the maintenance of the building, the boilers would have to be serviced. There were a couple that we had a big question about that one that we found on the backside of the building.
Yeah, so did we, yeah.
So, yeah.
When we finally got the door open to it, yeah.
So there was some issues like that. And again, a lot of it was basically maintenance, lack of maintenance on the building.
Okay, Marge?
Okay, thanks.
I want to ask a clarifier off what Matt is asking you. So I think the board initially was thinking that in the interim of time, before we come before the voters to talk in terms of ultimate use, which hopefully will be a new central office, was the notion that perhaps we could have student clubs there,
It was,
Lego leagues, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if it's an after-school club,
okay.
would that be appropriate, or is it the same standard? It's the same code?
Well, it's again, it was coached to me as used as classrooms, okay? An after-school club with students, I would actually have to look at, and basically, I don't want to speak out of turn. It could be possibly used as a meeting space, but then that would still be a place of assembly, which would bring in all of the requirements for a place of assembly, which would require a sprinkler, because you'd be basically doing a change of use of the building. So I think that's where we ran into an issue.
And I think off of that point, if there was like individual child testing, that would be not like a classroom use, it would be like a one-on-one with a
If it was,
student.
then that would basically be a business use.
Okay,
Yeah, that would be a business.
okay. And I think, Andy, did you have another question? And Cinda? Then let Cinda go first, please.
What about like for community education? Would that still be
Are
the
we talking
classroom?
adult education or children?
Adult.
Adult education, that would again be a place of assembly. And it would again require a sprinkler system installed.
Okay.
So thanks, John, for the, obviously, and I want, if people are watching this, I want to just restate. The intent of us purchasing this property wasn't to gut it and reuse it in its current structure, but rather to obtain the property primarily for the land.
Understood.
The fact that it had a building on it was like, okay, between now and when we determine the proper use of this land for the combined SAU sped building or another function, could the building be used for a function in an interim basis? And part of the exercise here is to understand, as you've described, the levels of use, whether it's a classroom, whether students are there, whether there's adults that are there, and what's required. And I think this is between what you've done in terms of your look and the fire engineer's report, it's helped to give us some bearing as to how much money it would cost to even use it as a meeting space for adult education or other sorts of meetings like that. So for me, that's really what it boils down to. And I think the question I would ask of Matt is, can we do just a high level, just so we know if we wanted to use it as a meeting space or a place where people gather, what that cost would be, just so we understand it. Because if you remember when I was talking about the maintenance budget, I was looking at costs of like heating oil and all the utility expenses.
Right.
I sort of asked the question what it would cost if we shuttered the building. Didn't use it at all, but just kept it so it maintained itself, didn't freeze, sort of prep it. Because again, I don't want to throw good money after bad from a school perspective. If it would a little bit of money to allow us to be able to use it for a year or whatever the time frame is going to be, that's great. But if not, we don't want to sink another penny into this if we know that to quote Stan Heydrich, the Caterpillar D9 is going to come rolling by as we prepare for it. So I guess my request would be is we just get a sort of scope and scale of what it would be to make it a meeting place. It'd just be good that we would know that.
Okay, so that would entail definitely all the patch and repairs of the inside and the new fire alarm panel and all ADA things taken care of. We had also discussed a couple of options for decommission. I think we could leave it as is and run heat, or we could purge the building and board it up.
Basically shut down and board it up.
Basically, and shut down. And we would physically, at that point in time, have to board up windows and doors
Correct.
and everything, so you knew, as a fire department, that there was no occupancy in that building.
Correct. At that point, you could disconnect all the utilities, you could shut down the fire alarms, what little sprinkler system.
Yeah.
Well, that's basically being decommissioning of a building.
Yeah, okay.
Cinda?
I mean, ultimately, having that property is very critical for the district because of the proximity that it is to our other facilities. But I think at the end of the day, I think what we're looking for is really that cost benefit of various options for that. So one of those would be to tear it down. What's the cost of tearing it down? What's the cost of trying to makeshift it, into other other uses, such as whether it's adult learning or other meeting space, things like that. But I think ultimately, I would say to administration, I think what we're trying to build on is kind of what are our options for the building and what's the cost for these options. And then we can begin to use that data to make a decision going forward, either for a new SAU building, not that that is what it's deemed to be. We haven't voted on that, but it's certainly an option. But there's other possible options for that property as well. So I think the sooner we can start to get that information all together, we can decide where we're going forward.
Just the charge for the Planning and Building Committee by April, I think it was that time frame, was to come back with an initial proposal of what to do for the SAU sped building. So I think I agree with what you said, but I'm more interested in what we do with the existing structure, whether we can use it or not for anything in an interim basis. But I think Planning and Building has the action to determine what the right approach is for the SAU sped building, whether it's restructure that structure or bulldoze it and start from scratch. So that's the time. It's sort of like a two-step process, I think.
Okay. I mean, I'm just saying that I'm building in my mind what those options are.
Okay. John, I thank you very much. I think, are there any other questions on this side? I'm going to double check before I let them go this time.
No,
good?
I'm fine. I thank John for coming by
Thank you
and
so
helping
much,
us
John.
out with this.
No problem at all.
Much appreciated, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And obviously, Matt, you know how to get a hold of me if there's any other questions? Yeah. This should not be a problem.
Thank you, John. And we're on to item number 5, which is the formal hearing on James Mastrocola Upper Elementary School budget for 2019-2020. And I bring Marcia McGill to the table to represent the building.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. Happy New Year. I'm Marcia McGill, the principal of the Upper Elementary School. And this evening, I'll be providing you with a review of, or an overview of the 2019-2020 Mastrocola Upper Elementary Schools budget. As with the past, the 2019-2020 budget proposals for the Upper Elementary School continues to reflect priorities established by the Merrimack School District's logic model, by maintaining progress in the areas of literacy, numeracy, technology, and school climate. The budget also reflects the need to be fiscally responsible and to strive for minimal budgetary implications. I want to thank all of you for providing questions ahead of time. I'll read through the questions, provide answers, and address any clarifications after going through all of the questions. I'd like to begin with the questions from Chairperson Barnes relative to the field trip account. The question was, what out-of-pocket costs do students have for these outings? Are there funds available for those receiving free and reduced lunch? Are those on free and reduced lunch expected to bring lunch from home? The highest cost charged per student for field trips ranges from $5 to $10 at the upper elementary school. The school does not have a line item for free and reduced lunch costs. However, regardless of the financial ability, all students attend field trips. Students receiving free and reduced lunch is confidential and unknown to us. As in any school day, if we are aware of any student who does not have a lunch, we provide that lunch. I've always said everyone eats at the upper elementary school. If it becomes known to a school staff member that there is a financial need for a family, the cost is covered by the school. Generally, field trip costs fluctuate yearly based on several factors. Increased transportation costs would be one. The mileage to and from a selected field trip site would be another. The grade level size, of course, would determine how many buses we would need to take, and that would alter that cost. And whatever the entrance fee that is charged is, that would be the part that is charged to the students. It's usually just that entrance fee. So the second question from Chairperson Barnes is in reference to math text versus math supplies. The question is, knowing we just rolled out a new math curriculum, are the expenses in the math text account truly for textbooks, such as unreturned or damaged, or are they for possible or disposable materials that could also be accounted for in the math supply account? And also states that JMU's shows a refreshed rate of 33% based on prior year's budget expenditures. The math text account will be used to purchase texts. We will purchase teachers' editions, which include resource masters and diagnosis and intervention materials at both grade 5 and grade 6. With a change in class size from one grade to the next, we need to supply teachers with the resources necessary to fully implement the new program. Additionally, these texts are needed for our special educators at both grade levels as well. The math supplies account will be used to purchase supplies necessary to implement the program, and they include items such as individual whiteboards, markers, cleaning wipes or mini erasers, plastic sheet covers, and graph paper. So those would be some of the things that come under the supplies. Vice Chair Schneider had asked a question about additional materials for social emotional learning skills. Across all elementary grades, this new category exists, totaling over $30,000 across all 4 buildings. Can administration or principals provide details on what these items include and how it will be integrated into the curriculum? For 4 years, the Merrimack School District, under the direction of the District Mental Health Committee, has been diligently working to create a system of care and learning supports for the district and community. Starting in April 2018, one component of our system of care and learning supports efforts included the evaluation and eventual implementation of classroom-based social and emotional learning curriculum and programs taught by teachers for grades K through 5. The goal is to provide more consistent and systematic social and emotional instruction and learning for all K-5 students across the district. During the last 4 years, during the exploration and implementation of our system of care, we have supported these changes and improvements with no direct cost to the district. Expenses related to the system of care changes have been funded through the Project Grow grant and current operating budget. The 2 standard-based curriculum programs under evaluation are Second Step and Paths for grades K through 5. These 2 research and evidence-based programs were selected for evaluation and organized by standards established by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is CASEL. Standards are organized within 5 areas of competencies: relationship skills, responsible decision-making, self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness. There is an abundance of recent research that shows evidence that social and emotional learning directly has a positive impact on students, including increased student achievement, short-term and long-term enhanced social communication skills, long-term preventative benefits with students less likely to make unhealthy and unsafe decisions, and better conditions for learning based on increased student safety and care. Starting in 2019-2020, we request budgetary support to purchase classroom-based social and emotional curriculum learning materials, either the Second Step or the PATHS program. The amount we're requesting is approximately $40,000, which includes the cost of materials, professional development, and online access for parents and educators for additional materials, training, and professional development. Our goal is for full implementation in a district-wide K-5 classroom starting in September of 2019. The majority of the expenses listed in each elementary school guidance text account are startup costs associated with the purchase of the new social and emotional learning program materials for each classroom, grades K through 5. In subsequent years, there may be ongoing nominal expenses, much less than the initial startup costs. To purchase ongoing materials based on teacher and grade level configurations, and to purchase ongoing replacement materials as needed. We thank you for your inquiry and your ongoing support for this system of care and social emotional learning efforts in our community. The second question by Vice Chair Snyder. All schools, furniture upgrades. I recognize that each school has an ongoing furniture upgrade set of line items. Can the schools help to let us understand how the listed items were chosen and whether they are must-replace items in that list versus things that can be expended? We determine furniture needs in a few different ways. For example, at the end of each school year, teachers are asked if they have any furniture needs, new furniture needs, or if they have furniture that needs to be repaired. If it's new furniture that's requested, it is prioritized by need. And furniture beyond repair is added to a repair list. Our goal is to provide teachers with the furniture needed to meet the instructional needs of students. New items requested are replacement for old items, furniture items that have been in the building, some of them for many years, longer than I've been there. I've been there a long time. Many pieces are beyond repair, some with ripped and torn fabric or chipped wood and plastic. Many of the old science stools are mismatched or are too tall for elementary students. Cafeteria tables are cumbersome and difficult to unfold or fold up. Additionally, the new tables are designed to foster social interaction among students. And then we're always striving for equity in each classroom for the furniture and needs that's needed to meet the instructional needs of students. Board Member Guayumi had asked us for the guidance text account to please explain this item and why it relates to grade 5 versus grades 5 and 6. Grade 6 is typically not included in an elementary social emotional learning curriculum model due to the developmental differences in instruction between elementary and middle school. Middle school SEL programs typically target students in grades 6 through 8. Sixth grade will be addressed in the future when the social emotional learning expansion efforts move to cover those grades 6 through 8 or grades 6 through 12.
And your next questions are from Naomi Schoenfeld, and I'm
Yes.
just going to take this housekeeping item because she's excused from tonight's meeting because she's on business travel.
Okay.
So thank you for the indulgence.
So at this time, if you have any clarifications that you'd like to have or any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
For those here, are there any questions? Cinda?
It's really not a question, but just before I forget, I was wondering if we could have maybe at one of our next board meetings a little more information regarding the second step and PASS program. I don't think we've done that, have we? We haven't had that here at our table, right?
No, we can absolutely.
Right, it's just a matter of timing
Yep.
because the staff are going through the evaluation process now, so it's just a question of when we bring it to you. Do you wish it to come to you before we finish the budget process, which would mean January 22nd, or we could do it in February and March?
I don't think, at least for me, speaking for myself, I don't think it will impact my budget decisions.
It won't impact the cost, because when we calculated the cost, we did it based on those systems together. So we know we can cover the cost whichever one is chosen. So if we do it then in February or March,
That would be fine for me. I
Okay.
don't know how the others feel.
Andy?
Yeah, I think it's be good, once we get done with budgetary to learn more about it, so we have all the answers and sort of understand how it fits. Because, I mean, looking at the budget amount but not knowing exactly, I mean, your explanation helped me understand a lot, but I think others at the table may have had the same question like Cinda did. So I think getting more information about it, some examples, to sort of carry on the conversations we've had in past years would be helpful for us. So after budget, I think would work all right.
Yes.
We also did receive a grant from the state, correct, for some of this work? Has that been basically supporting some of our development work and some things like that?
Project Grow, which Marcia alluded to. So John and Julie have talked briefly about that when they've come before you, but it hasn't been highlighted unto itself. I mean, so we can have that done at the same time.
Okay, and I would say for myself, I'm more excited to hear about it than anything else, because I know that they've been working on this for a long time. So I'm just very much looking forward to hearing that update.
Okay, so on that note, I think onward to Naomi's questions, and
Okay,
it's all been spit.
my paper. So from board member Schoenfeld, we had a couple questions. One was the math text account. The total for this line for teachers' materials and mathematics has been substantially reduced from previous years. How has this savings been accomplished? Are there resources that will no longer be available or are no longer needed? And this is a question for all elementary schools. All original materials and resources will continue and will be available to all students. When the new program was initially purchased and implemented, each student was provided with access to resources and materials for a 6-year period. So when the license was bought, it was bought for 6 years. We are currently in year 2, so we have materials available to students through the initial purchase for another 4 years. So that's what brought that cost down. And once we get 4 years from now, we'll have that initial investment or that investment again to go through. Any questions about that? Because that's I
we're
think
good
we
for now.
explained it through some of the math presentations that we've had. The second question was guidance in text again, to help contextualize this expense for those who may not have seen or heard the presentations to the board on this topic in the past. Please describe these materials and the ways they contribute to producing a safe and supportive learning environment. We are purchasing social and emotional learning materials that are classroom kit materials for each teacher in grades K through 5 in all elementary schools. The social and emotional learning materials, which are a one-time upfront purchase, are kit-based curriculum materials organized around the standards-based curriculum materials established by CASEL. The 5 skills and competency domains, again, are relationship skills, responsible decision-making, self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness. As stated previously, starting in the 2019-2020 year, we request budgetary support to purchase classroom-based social and emotional curriculum learning materials, either that second step or that PATHS program. The amount we are requesting is approximately $40,000, which includes the cost of materials, professional development, and online access for parents and educators, for additional resources, training and professional development, and home-based tips and activities. This will be integrated into the curriculum by teachers as part of the school day. It will explicitly teach social and emotional lessons and will have materials necessary to integrate in other content areas, especially the areas of reading and writing. Both Second Step and PATHS can also be integrated with each school's already established school-wide expectations or behavioral programs. For example, at the upper elementary, we're PBIS, a Positive Behavioral Interventions and Support School, as well as Mastrocola Elementary and Thorntons Ferry School, or it will fit easily with Reed's Ferry with their responsive classroom model that they use. Our goal is to fully integrate social and emotional learning within our core instruction, just taught by classroom teachers district-wide in K-5 classrooms starting in September of 2009.
Cinda.
And just to clarify, that comes out to between $6,000 and $7,000 per grade from kindergarten through 5th grade, correct?
I think our amount is, what, $6,700?
Yeah.
67 and 67 or
Right.
something like
The
that.
40,000 is across all grades.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of the upper elementary school? Seeing none, we thank you for your time, your preparation, and we look forward to the rest of your school year being very productive and positive.
Thank you.
So great seeing you.
Good night. Thank you.
And we are on to our next agenda item, which is the technology library media budget, and I invite to the table Director Nancy Rose.
Evening. I'm a little under the weather, so let's hope that I hold it together. I'm here to talk about the technology and library media services budget. As in previous years, the goal is to continue to support the teaching and learning efforts of the school district through the technology and information systems and the library program. And we continue to try to increase access to technology for students to stay on top of our replacement of the technology that we already have in place. We're working on increasing digital skills and also helping educators personalize and differentiate instruction for students. A few standout things for this budget is that we have to work on some infrastructure for our storage area network, or a SAN. We have equipment that was purchased in about 2009 with the federal HERA funds that needs to be replaced. And we're looking at a couple of different ways to do that so that we can also distribute storage across a couple of different buildings in the district, which is a better practice than having everything in one location. So we're working on improving our overall performance and ability to recover from outages. And then the other area that I think impacts the technology and library budget in a new way is the adoption of HB 1612. It's an amendment to RSA 18966, and this is the student data privacy law. And we will be required to do more accurate tracking of websites that are, and also any application used for instruction. And we're going to need to do a data governance plan, so we will have to do a security assessment. So those will be new costs to the district that we have never had to, we've never done them before. We tend to operate these things to, according to best practice, but not in a formal way. So this is going to have to be more formal. I have questions that I will go through. So from Chairman Barnes, please review the systems to be purchased and their costs related to the device management and tracking software needed to maintain compliance with HB 1612 amendment to RSA 18966. Is this an unfunded mandate, or will we receive state funding to offset these expenses, and will these costs be recurring? And then I'm just going to combine that with Board Member Guglielmi's question. The software line was increased by $15,000 due to compliance with HB 1612. Amendment to RSA 18966. Please remind us of what this means and if there are any other foreseeable increases due to compliance. So per the amendment, we will have to improve our ability to monitor website usage at a more granular level. We currently have, we filter according to federal requirements, but our ability to really dig in and see exactly what sites are being used is not quite as granular to the user as we would need to be able to do. We will have to have a workflow in place for vetting, approving, and tracking any software application that wants to be used in the classroom, as well as tracking the terms of service and privacy, and if those comply with the newly established state minimum requirements, which I believe there's a draft in place circulating now. It's not publicly available yet, but the law will go into effect at the end of June, and we're just now getting those minimum requirements. They're not available yet. And we will also have to create an accurate data governance plan. To do this, we'll have to establish a baseline with a data security audit. And this last piece was identified as a best practice. There were some joint meetings in the late fall between the New Hampshire School Boards Association, the New Hampshire CTO Council, which is my organization, Primex for risk management, and also different school district administration and technology leadership people. And in some ways, this is one of the biggest costs related to this law, because this is not something school districts have tended to have funds to do. So, I mean, it's a good practice. It's a very good idea. We're not a technology operation, and so this is something that we will have to step up into. So to answer the second part of your question, Chairman Barnes, there is no funding available from the state government or from the Department of Ed. The New Hampshire CTO group has joined the Student Data Privacy Consortium, which is an organization based originally out of Cambridge Public Schools. The CTO for Cambridge Public Schools is like one of the national leaders in student data privacy. And this consortium is an aggregator of websites and their terms of service, and is a way for us to see what other districts and or states have adopted or approved or not approved, or if they have had vendors go back and change their terms of service or negotiated different contracts. It isn't necessarily a tracking utility for the vetting process. And because New Hampshire's DOE doesn't have that kind of an infrastructure in place in New Hampshire, every district will have to do this on their own. So that's why one of the costs is an ongoing cost for the vetting and management of those systems. We did actually, as an organization, talk about the feasibility of even looking into hiring a person to do this work. And we haven't gotten there yet. So, and I kind of don't see it going there. It doesn't seem feasible because we're an association. We don't have any management capability in place. So that's kind of where that is now. This all has been bubbling up over the last 6 months. So it's been a huge learning curve. And as we find out what the minimum requirements are for student data privacy and what that means to us, it will continue to be a steep learning curve. So I hope that answers your question about that. The costs will be roughly about a $7,000 increase over what we currently pay for filtering to get us into an appliance that just has more robust reporting functions and more ability to tune into who's doing what. And also we're looking at one that can help us. The worlds of what we do on our wired network and our wireless network don't necessarily always get reported in the same place. And we're looking at a system that would allow us to bring that together. The systems that we've looked at for the vetting, tracking, and sharing of websites and apps runs about $2 to $3 a student. So that would be in the $8,000 to $10,000 range. We are looking at negotiating some better rates for that. Right now, a lot of districts are just using spreadsheets, which is a short-term solution, but it isn't necessarily a workflow process. And there's the cost benefit of the time invested in trying to get a system put together versus just purchasing a system that does it. So then one of the other questions was, are we expecting increases? I have no idea, because this is new to us. It's new to the state. You know, we may find that there's ways that we can leverage our consortium. So yeah, I think we just have to operationalize what we can operationalize and move forward. And I also the security audit will probably open our eyes to concerns that we have just in general. And so that may also be an area to look at. Chairman Barnes' next question was about phones. The question was, why was the actual expenditure in this 2017-18 only half of what the prior year's budget was, and why will the lower rate not prevail in this year's budget? I think this is an account that Matt does an average over a period of time. So I think that was one of the impacts. And the cost of our VoIP service, the voice over IP service, continues to go down, but we also added a cell phone because we hired the new technician. So that would have been the reason for this year's increase. So I would assume that over time that will just continue to get tweaked and reflect reality. Board member Schneider asked a question, the technology budget and the high school. The technology budget has detailed line items about replacement and addition of computers in each building, but the MHS budget has a specifically called out addition of 30 laptops with a cart for the math department, which I think was referenced in the technology budget as well. Can you help us understand where the line is drawn between the tech budget items and those called out within a specific school? So we've done this in a few different cases. When technology is identified specifically in support of a department's goals, we tend to place that item in that budget. So we did this in the past with tech ed at the high school with large format printers, and also with world language and their iPads. So those came out of their budget. They're used within that department and managed by that department. We do tech support, but they essentially agree how they're going to consume that product within the department. And they also identified what they wanted to be able to do with those laptops looking across the different course offerings. And then as a contrast, when the capital improvement invests in technology for students, it tends to be broader use and managed by the library and distributed that way. Board member Gualyumi asked, please tell us more about the sub-item in the CIP of expand and update computers for $172,170. I'm particularly interested in this how it compares to recent years and expected trends for future years. So that line item in the CIP is all of the additional and replacement computers that we purchase. It includes the lease amounts from 17-18 and 18-19. And then this year or next year, it will include about $30,000 for new devices for students and staff. This number is actually quite a bit lower than we normally would do in recent years because of the need to invest in the SAN. We found that we actually had hardware failures that we needed to address that we were not anticipating. And so the net impact is that our life cycle, we're trying to reduce the overall life cycle of our desktops and laptops. When I got here, we had desktops that were in the 12 to 14 year range still actively in use, and also laptops routinely getting used for more than 6 years. So that will lengthen a little bit, but we're trying to also, everyone that we have, we need to be able to replace, and we're being asked constantly to add. So there's the demand going as well as the replacement need. Excuse me. When I was here in September, we talked about, what are our plans going forward with one-to-one? And I think this is where the conversation will need to really start to shift to how do we innovatively look at funding for devices that are used for instruction? Because that's really where the growth area is probably going to occur. And then where are the cost savings? And so that's the research that I'm doing now to bring back following the questions that you guys raised. But, there's a lot of different areas that we can be looking at in a more collaborative and cohesive way, such as, the printing costs. What do we spend on physical texts? What do digital programs versus text-based or print-based programs cost? And then the other, in addition to devices, which this line item specifically is on the devices, is what are the other costs, such as the need for increased bandwidth sized for need, the infrastructure and the access points required to support those devices, the systems for the filtering and management of the content for those devices. Tech support is another big area. And then another whole huge area is the time training for staff for both the professional development and delivering a digital curriculum, and also the time to develop the lessons or activities that would be used for that. So this is seismic. So the devices is one aspect of it, and it's hard enough. We're looking to try to keep our budget as flat as we can. Maintaining old systems, we've heard a lot tonight about the cost of maintaining the district and just the facilities and everything. And trying to move us forward, we always think we're going to have to be very mindful of what can we stop doing or can we do differently. So that's a big area of growth for us for planning. Those were my main questions. My last two were for Board Member Schoenfeld. So should I just keep going? So her question was, please talk a little about how choices are made regarding which software, research databases, et cetera, will be licensed or purchased by the district. What is the selection process? Who participates, and by whom are the final decisions made? How are decisions made regarding whether to continue existing licenses? I figured that the easiest way to address this would be to actually break out. That's a large line. It's up to $200,000, and it's grown a lot since I've been here. I don't think that's a causal relationship, by the way. Excuse me. I just realized what that sounded like. So roughly 52% of the software budget that I oversee is used for the research or curricular-based software and applications. So research resources are basically what we use in the library program and what the students use for research and in supportive instruction beyond like specific to what their texts are. And that's an ongoing process. The librarians and the tech educators and I talk all the time about what those systems are and what they do. We look at usage statistics, excuse me. And also, I at least annually have a discussion with the public library about what they license for those kinds of tools so that we don't do too much duplication between systems that are more geared at student level users. And then the software that supports curriculum is reviewed in that same process. We have quite a few systems that are used at almost like a district or multi-school level, such as our video streaming system, BrainPop. I have regular discussions with department heads or curriculum facilitators who are always working on what it is that they need in their areas. So it's a collaborative process, and we tend to agree on how it is that we're going to move forward, and if something is going to be acquired that's a new service, how we fit it in, or if it's a replacement of. Several years ago, we looked at the credit recovery courseware system, and I pulled the department heads together in the high school and reviewed a couple of systems, and they made a decision as a group, and we moved forward. And it's very iterative, and it tends to just be based on who the parties are that would have the most information. And then I also talk with John Fabrizio a fair amount. He's behind me. And we are always looking at ways to support universal design for learning. So if there are systems that we can look at that support students that have identified needs, but that would also be good for the benefit of the greater good, we try to find ways that we can make that work. So an example of that, not necessarily software, but we're working on getting sound field systems installed into classrooms for better audio, and also to help teachers just not have to yell. But the other area is, just a system like Learning Ally, which is an audiobook system aimed at supporting students with reading difficulties. And it gets broad use for students just that need assistance with getting into a text. And this is also an area that I think as a district, we're working on improving how we do this decision making. And it's kind of the convergence of all of the different elements of shifting to more online. How do we invest money, save on what we're buying in print? How do we make sure that what tools we're using align to curricular goals? The HB 1612 requirements for privacy are going to probably change what we have access to, because I think that the student data privacy law is a good thing in that it forces us to think about what it is that we are allowing to leave the district. And that's a very good thing. It's just something that in some ways the horse is out of the barn and we're trying to bring the horse back. So there's a lot that can be done in these kinds of planning processes that I think will achieve multiple different kinds of goals. And I think that this year and next year will be big areas of opportunity and growth for us in those areas. So then that was half of the software budget. Then about 30% is what I call system and infrastructure software. This is purchased. Usually I work very closely with the network administrator and the technology staff, and this is software that's licensing for like the wireless management system, firewalls, the filtering, anti-spam, and data integration systems. So that's kind of the back-end plumbing part of the software. And then there's about 16% of the software budget is what I call productivity. So that's things like Windows and Office, Adobe products, the software in the labs that kids use to just make things. It's not necessarily curricular or research, it's productivity. And then the last little bit, about 3%, are utilities. They're usually small packages that are used for like resource scheduling or little taskies, pieces of software. Most of those are selected based on the site and what they were trying to do. So management of laptops in a way that accommodates the way that they schedule. And there's one piece of software that will do this, and it's a couple $100. But it's a little pool of applications that they tend to get selected based on what the specific requirements are of the school. So that's how the decisions are made. It has very much to do with what the software is used for and who the parties are that are involved. So those were all of my questions.
Well, I do have a follow-on question to the one you just had, and that is you talk about things that are selected, which means that there are things that weren't. And I know that we keep a cut list, things that were vetted for educational purposes but not budgeted for. And do any of the platforms that either you cut out because of usage or but it was used but maybe not as much, or things that you vetted, but because of the cost of adding one more application into the mix didn't get selected, would that make the cut list?
It kind of happens in an operational way. I think if there was something that we specifically wanted to move forward with, it would come up in this process. So the learning management system was a group decision. It was a committee that was a subcommittee of the communication committee. That was then brought forward, and it was part of the budget process. It was discussed in the budget process. An example of one that was not that we cut, but it was an interesting situation. It was software that I initially licensed as part of the library program for electronic books, and that was the way that the system was originally marketed, was online books. And over time, that company shifted the goal of the product to become more of a literacy tool with levelized books. And it got bought by a company that was managing schools. So the product itself sort of changed its colors a little bit. And when it started to talk about being a levelized system, it raised my alarm bells because we have language arts coordinators. So when I initially purchased it, it was a library exponent or part of the library collection. And then it evolved, and suddenly I'm thinking, this is more language arts coordinator turf. This isn't my area. And as I entered into discussions with them, they were looking at it, and it had interest, but it didn't have enough interest that they thought it warranted continuing with it because they had their own areas that they were working on and wanted to move forward. And we also have had some turnover in that area. And so it was not something that we continued with because it had changed, and we just determined that there wasn't a place for it anymore. So that was it. It was kind of an interesting one because the software itself changed, and but we as a group decided to not continue with that for now.
Excellent. So I think it's important to this board to know that if there were things that didn't make it to our table that would add value, that we know what you gave up. So
Mhm.
that's something that if that doesn't apply, then that doesn't seem to apply. That wouldn't be something I would consider to be a cut list item. But if it's something that based on all of the infrastructure and whether it be wireless access points, you had to just pick your fights. But you would have integrated this new software or tool to help the classroom experience, and you didn't because you already had so many irons in the fire. That's good for us to know. So I didn't, if it goes that way, I'm definitely hoping it makes our cut list.
Okay.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? Linda?
This one's for you again.
Okay.
Oh, good.
So as it relates to the compliance part of our discussion, one of the things that Nancy had mentioned was that many schools are kind of going this on their own, going this route on their own, trying to figure out the best way to provide compliance. So I'm wondering if any conversations have come up at the New Hampshire School Board Association, or if that's something you
More
could bring.
so. So they had 2 seminars that were completely sold out. They had one and it sold out so quickly. They had a second that also sold out. And I actually, when the first one came, I sent it to Nancy's attention in case it would give her a resource she didn't have on hand
I
already.
went.
And you did go. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's been sold out twice because this is such an uncharted territory. And I think for us, school boards and districts to plan for infrastructure improvements and not have the budget preparation to support it. Again, that's why I was asking about unfunded mandates, because this is one of them. Absolutely. It doesn't come for free. And when a law changes and it creates an expenditure in the district, that puts a lot of pressure on the districts to punt, especially if it's in the middle of budget season. So, and there are no state funds, as you
A lot
mentioned.
of states are putting these kinds of laws on the books, and it's a good thing. I'm not against the law by any
Not at all.
stretch of the imagination. It's just that the structure of the New Hampshire Department of Ed is such that with local control, so much of this kind of work lands back on school districts. And so my group, the New Hampshire CTO Council, is all the tech directors. We regularly try to figure out ways to support smaller districts who are solving a lot of these problems. And in some small districts, the technology is handled by a well-intentioned teacher who's doing it for a stipend, or a person in a business administrator role that has just expanded into this other kind of a role. And we're getting into really more high-end and more sophisticated ability to manage what we're doing. And the growth of the use of technology in districts has changed. And I don't think that we could have anticipated how much of an aggressive marketplace that would have created, which is part of what we're dealing with, which is these vendors who they'll make any kind of a product and put a label on it and call it educational and get you to load up student information. And then that becomes a marketable, saleable thing. And that's a lot of what the law is concerned about. And that's a valid concern. And it does help if we have more of a consortial approach, because if we need to negotiate with the likes of a Microsoft or a Google, Merrimack can't necessarily do that, but possibly New Hampshire can. Even some of the bigger states have had to really work hard to get those negotiations in place. So the Student Data Privacy Consortium will be a big asset for us. It'll be a big help. It'll also give us some guidelines to see what other states have wanted to do change or what their requirements are. But this is just terrain that we've moved into and done our best to just try to stay ahead and to be as responsible as we can. And now we have to take it from our best intentions and attempts to formalized oversight. And that's an operation, that's just an entirely different way of going about doing business, which is the right thing to do. But it's, we just were talking about keeping the budget flat. And my staff, I get to talk about that periodically about, my staff is pretty small. And it's also a change in practice for teachers.
Mhm.
So.
No, your staff is small, and I know that we've said it before at this table. A number of us work for organizations that support with large teams, smaller groups of employees than what we have in our district right now. So, immediately when we start talking about these things, I'm thinking of, headcount increases, and, it makes me think that might be the inevitable. The organizations that I work with also go through like high trust certifications, and that's really rigorous because of health insurance data and stuff that we work with.
Yeah.
But thank you for the work and research that you put into this, and continue to let us know how we can help.
Are there any other questions for technology, library, media? Seeing none, thank you very much. We hope you feel better. We know it's going around. Going back to the Petri dish tomorrow is not going to help. So, thank you. And on to our next hearing, which is the Student Services Budget. And I invite to the table with all his books, Director of Student Services, John Fabrizio. Welcome. You have the arms of a lawyer with all the law books I have to carry.
I feel like that sometimes. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Special Services budget for the year 1920. So before I start, I just want to I do walk around my books every year, and I thought I never really showed what all my books are that I carry here, and they actually are real books that I daily have to look at. So I thought that for a second, because where it starts from, a couple questions this year, and I had a conversation with Matt Chevenel today, and I said, Matt, no question's easy because it's all in my budget based upon a lot of laws and regulations. And it's usually not one book, it's four to fumble through to find out am I answering this accurately? And I hope to sometimes. So give it my best shot. So first thing we have is our New Hampshire Standards for Education of Children with Disabilities. This is kind of the new regulations that were just updated a couple of years ago. And then on that, for every meeting we go to, we have the special education procedural safeguards that every parent gets. And this is kind of a brief overview of what this book entails. Then we have the guide for New Hampshire Standards Education Disability, which has been put out by the Parent Advocacy, the PIC, Parent Advocacy Center. And this really is a more descriptive version of all these things. It helps me kind of put it in more layman's terms, and so we understand kind of what does that mean for our parents and our families. So we often reference this. Then, of course, our big law book that we don't like to go into. And then a great book for anyone looking is this one, too, is the Answer Book on Special Ed Law. And this is a lot of our federal ed laws. And sometimes you have to dig deeper to say, what does the federal law say around this? Because it's only referenced in the state law, and we have to go into some of these things. So I do that to begin to say, I don't like to just carry these around, but sometimes I may be asked a question, and I have to go a little deeper into some of my friends with me. So I bring them with me often. So tonight, As I said, I thank you for the opportunity, and I'm going to begin by first of all putting my glasses on so I can see my paper, and talk about really some questions. I think I'll begin tonight with questions. I usually begin with my overview, but I'll start with the questions tonight, and then I'll give my overview after, I think, and then I'll open it up to more questions you may have. So first question I had tonight was from Chair Barnes, and she asked me a question around, it was really around our accounts for tutoring, which, there's various tutoring accounts. There's one for every level of elementary, middle, and high school. And she said, please provide an overview of how these accounts are managed. And to answer that, the tutoring accounts are managed by Student Services Office, our office. Each case is handled individually and required that each school personnel that has a student who may need a tutoring request, they fill out a form, which is called a tutoring request form. That tutoring request form has detail on kind of why the child's out, what are the needs of the child, why they're requesting tutoring, and then who's part of this decision. And then it has to be signed off by the building principal. So once that's done, it comes over to my office. It's put in the blue folder. We call it the blue folder. That's where I know they are. That's where I know where they are. And then it comes to me for review. And with that is usually contact who is asking for this request. And I'm the one that will contact that person. And if I had follow-up questions, if they weren't descriptive enough, I would ask the questions. Once I sign it, it goes back in the blue folder. Then we have a series of tutors that we contact in my office. Kathy Currents, my administrative assistant, keeps track of those tutors. Her responsibility is to contact them. Some of them are former retired teachers. Some of them are local teachers in our area that aren't working full-time. Some of them are, we often sometimes, if depending on what it is, at a lower level, may just need a paraeducator to do some of the tutoring with a student. And we have a list of them that we utilize. Or we go to an agency if it's a tutoring time that we may not have someone for, like maybe a morning time or something like that where we may not have anyone for that. And that's kind of how it is managed. And we look at each account to kind of based on the needs of those. So if a student is without a disability, is not identified with disability, they're offered up to 5 hours of tutoring a week. If a student is identified with a disability, they're offered 10 hours a week of tutoring, up to. So the next question was, how have we covered the accounts that are budgeted at 500 and expended from 1,500 to 2,000 due to actual expenses? In each of these cases, when we see an account that fluctuates, I communicate with Matt Chevenel. And after each manifest, we look at it, and we look at all the accounts that are encumbered throughout my budget. And if I encumber obligations I know I'll have for the year. So if I know there's a placement, I know what that costs, fixed cost, I'll encumber that money for the year. I do that if I have a contracted for a, let's say for a speech language pathologist. I know their contracted amount that I pay for the year. I encumber those funds. Once we look at the end, do I have overages? And based on those overages, there's an amount there that we know, Matt and I know where we are. And I look at it and say, okay, I'm running over on this line. Am I okay from that bottom line perspective? And if we are, we move forward in that part. So then next question was, what is the difference between regular and salaried tutoring accounts? There's multiple accounts. Where it says the SEP tutoring regular, those are for students who do not have an identification of disability. Those are non-disabled students. If it says tutoring salaried, those are for students who have IEPs. It's just the way it is in the budget. That's the definition between the two of them in the budget. Is there any other question on that? Did I answer those? Okay. All right. And then the next question was around charter schools. We're spending about $40,000 for servicing providers, students in charter schools. Can you please explain this? The funds in the account are used to service provider charter schools with disabilities for things such as anything from speech pathologist, occupational therapist, audiologist. Under public law 94B, charter public school law requires us, any student attending a charter school in our district, are required by law to provide those services based on their current IEP. So if a child was in our school, let's say September, October, we wrote a nice IEP for them. We thought they were going to be in our school. We had the services all lined up. Under the law, the parent made a decision to move the student to a charter school. Well, they have that right under the law, so they do so. We still are obligated to anything in that IEP that we provide for a service. So we do provide those services in the charter school.
So if you could just slow down on that one for a second.
Sure.
And so we're spending $40,000 for services for these students at charter schools. So if they say went automatically to a charter school, but they are a Merrimack resident, then they would get an IEP regardless. So even if they didn't start in our district, they would get the IEP paid for by the Merrimack School District.
Correct. We
Okay.
would write the way the law states is we would write the IEP. For example, if it was a student in the upper elementary school, I'll pick there because it's simpler than talking to 3 different ferry schools, the 2 ferry schools in Massapequa. So in the upper elementary school, say we had a 5th grade student. If that 5th grade student was already there and there was possibly a disability, we would be required under law to assess them and look and say, is there disability, and go through the process. If there was, we would write that IEP as if they were in our school.
Mhm.
So if they were, we would write it because they could come back to the upper elementary school on any given day. So we write it as they were in our school with the services and things we would give them if they came to our school. That's the way it's written.
Okay.
So we provide those. In the same thing, your follow-up question was, how do we supervise the staff that are required for the compliance for this IEP?
Because compliance is also our responsibility, even though we don't
Compliance
see the child every
and
day.
interact with the IEP. So given that, it's a great question, because what happens is we've done this building based in Merrimack. Not all districts do. We've made the choice as a team that if the child is of age to be in 5th grade, well, the upper elementary school would manage that IEP. They would be assigned a case manager, just like you are if you came to our school, and the coordinator would oversee that case manager, having the meeting with the parents in the school. That's the same process would happen. They would be required to also do progress reports, checking in on the child, making sure services were rendered, checking with the service providers, making sure they were in place, and overseeing progress monitoring of the students' academic achievement. So that would be their role, and currently we do that with all of our.
Andy?
Actually, excuse me. I actually have a related question about charter schools. I didn't ask the question, but I think you'll know the answer. Shannon talked about the role that we have for charter schools and what we have to do. One of the line items that's typically been in our budget is transportation of students to a charter school that we budgeted the last 2 years, but this year we haven't, to the tune of, it's like, it probably would have been over $40,000 this year we budgeted. Can you explain? No, it's not. It's zero. It's $1. This is the IEP
that was
one.
no, the IEP one. If
The
you look
IEP
at
one.
the charter school transportation, that's for students that go to charter schools regardless of ability.
Right. This is an
Okay.
IEP.
Oh,
charter.
gotcha,
This is
gotcha.
just student services.
So again, looking at when I'm trying to create a budget that as close as I can get to being funded, and a lot of projections in special ed of where I'm going to be. When Matt and I looked at this and talked about it, the last 3 years I haven't expended it. I call me lucky, call me what I am, where I am right now, but it is a hopeful based on average that I haven't had to use it. If per se we do, I would go with the same logic that I've used, that child belongs to the upper elementary school. I would tap the elementary line item for busing if I needed to in that area. That's what I would do next year if that happened.
Okay.
So that's kind of, I went on a 3-year average that I said I haven't used this, and to me, if we had to look when we had conversations as an administrative team about where can we come to be closer, I said there's a place I think I can be okay.
Right. No, I appreciate that too.
I have a
because-
history of it.
Because sometimes we get said we budget for everything. Why can't we be more accurate on the budgeting? And you're using that logic. We haven't used it for the last 3 years, so let's say no. And we could have to do it then if a student needs it, and we'll budget at that point. But at this point, we're not. So.
Right.
Okay.
And that's what I said. And I'll track it through that line item that it was in.
Great.
You'll see it. You'll see an over expenditure in there, but I will actually be tapping the funds out of that to show that it was used for that purpose in that
Okay.
year.
Great.
And that's what I'll have to do. So in the last part of the question was, what operational strains is placed on your department and resources? Well, I guess I don't see it as a strain because it's a student of ours in Merrimack, and I am the LEA, and I guess I see it as it's a strain in the fact that yes, there's travel involved for some of our service providers. It's managing something off our campus. Yes, so it's a strain in those areas. I'm more of collaboration in some of those areas than I am strain, where I try to work really close to with Gate City Charter School. They have the majority of our kids, or Academy of Science and Design. We've getting to know these programs a little better. And some of the longevity of being in my position, I know some of the people and directors there. It's become more minimal strain over the years. Right now, I say it today. Tomorrow, who knows? Because of the right of the parent to move a child to charter school. It's a unique right in my world of all these law books, where everything else is a placement decision. The charter schools aren't a placement decision. It is a parent right to move and change. And given that, so far, strain, I would say minimal right now. Could it increase in any day? Yes, it could.
And I know I didn't put this on my list, but since we're kind of in that space, how many student services, and you don't have to give me an accurate number if you're not ready, that's fine too. How many student services supported students are at charter schools right now?
How many students are in
Yes,
charter schools right now?
that your department supports?
I'm going to, 7's my number in my head. And I think I'm pretty accurate. It
Mhm.
fluctuated within the last 2 weeks. So I think that could be off 1 or 2, but I'm about 7 right from our district that in our building that I know we're providing.
And they actually they have the right to, if they don't want to accept a student, they feel they're not going to support them, then they can actually decline enrollment for them where we can. Correct?
I can't answer that, Shannon.
Okay.
I don't know what they're on their end, what their parts are. I can only speak
Mhm.
to what I have to provide when they go there.
You bet. Fair
Okay.
enough. Thank you.
Okay, so my next set of questions were from Cindy Guglielmi, and I think that they really were around extracurricular activities, the first one. And I have a handout for you because, again, like I said, when I start digging in for some of these questions, so I will do my best to answer this question. It's a very involved question. And if you can remember back in about 2013, 14, I did a pretty lengthy presentation on extracurricular activities and schools and our new requirements. And that's when we added in some line items around these areas. And these are the line items that your question came from, Cinda. It really was line items, and they are all the ones around paraeducators and co-curricular activities. And I think that many of so I'll ask the question you asked, is many of these items support children in IEPs for extracurricular support. Please tell me the type of general supports that you provide for these students and why the type of extracurricular activities are supported, i.e. sports, destination imagination, ... So there was a technical advisory, as you see, that was issued from Federal Department of Education on January 25th, 2013. And it states, in short, the district has to provide each under the Department of Education in Section 504 and IDEA, school districts are required to provide a quality education for students with a disability and provide them opportunities to benefit from school district programs equal to that of students without disability. So what that means in essence, and it's in the next 18 pages I handed you, if you want to read more about them, it says in a nutshell that if we have an opportunity after school for a child to participate and we are sponsoring it by the school, I have to provide anything that's outlined for that child to be able to have access to it. And that's kind of what it is. So what programs? Multiple and many. I think we have kids from that participate in sports. We have integrated sports. We have band and music and chorus and Destination Imagination and different clubs. We have Merrimack Cares. I can think of all the ones that we do. That we have kids involved in so many things, and I'm pleased to sit here and say it's increased. And I think that since we started this, it's kind of opened the idea to people to say, let's be more inclusive to have kids after school because we can and provide it. And I think that's been a wonderful thing for what's happened in the district over the last few years. And it was based on the awareness brought forward by this January 25th, 2013 memo. So, and then in a related vein, you also asked, what type of supports do we provide for extracurricular leaders that may not or may not have specialized trainings in dealing with children for specific children that require IEP support? Or should we earmark budgeting dollars for this support? Well, we do have line item in there for specialized staff training, and it's funded with about $15,500, and that's kind of what that's for. When I have a low incidence disability or something that's uncommon that we don't see all the time, albinoism, something that sometimes we see that different medical needs, sometimes kids with epilepsy that may not look like physically they have something, but they do. I'll utilize this money to bring in trainers. Sometimes it's for our CPI training or CPR training that we need to do in the district, and that's what we utilize that money for doing.
I don't know if I can jump in a
Paula?
second.
Sure.
So, I would say, like, when we look at the cross-section of our extracurricular activities, right, we have a number of students that are on IEPs for a variety of reasons. And so let's take a couple of common reasons that a student may have, or an example of a student that may have an IEP. Maybe they have ADHD, maybe they have autism or Asperger's. Is there any kind of training, although they may not need a para specifically with them, to still meet some of the obligations we might have to that student or to the IEP? My question is, like, let's take sports, for example. We bring in coaches. Sometimes we have teachers that step up and fill the role of a coach, but we can't always get that, right? So, when we have teachers, they're trained with the children, and how some of these certain conditions may manifest themselves in the classroom, maybe on the field, whatever. But we also bring in a number of people that have no experience in dealing with students or students with conditions. So my thought is, do we do any kind of a training, an orientation, maybe for coaches or in athletics, but also we have other areas that we bring in, extracurricular areas where we bring in maybe parents to lead a team that may have support with their own children, let's say, but maybe a training might be beneficial across the board for people that we bring in to support our district that maybe is not a teacher by training or a para by training or something like that. So that's kind of what I was getting to with that, because it makes me wonder if maybe we have a hole or a gap that we might be able to work to close in that situation.
Do we currently know? Do we have any formalized training for anyone who runs extracurricular activity? No, we don't at this time.
Would we have money in the budget if we were to be able to start that kind of effort?
I guess I would have to plan, to be an honest answer, I have to plan out what that looked like.
Yeah.
We currently don't have a thing in place for that. I know we have certain things like Title IX training. We have other things like that happen that are training for people who work and employed by the district, but nothing is a formalized special ed training for that.
Okay.
No, we don't.
Because without that, it makes me wonder if we're truly meeting the obligations of this, as far as, or where that I know there's gray area there, but
Well, I think we are meeting the accommodations. This is done basically, if you read through the obligations, this is done through the IEP process. If you know a kid's going to participate in an after-school curriculum, it's making sure that that does happen. And that is responsibility of the case manager to make sure if their child, why they're a manager of that child, if they're going to go forward and move that, the people that are with them have an awareness of who they are and what they need are. And I use some examples of where that does play out. And we have done some training because of the fact that we're going to send this child to, for example, bowling, for example, out in the community, do volunteerism through Merrimack Cares, things like that. We have provided the ability to do training, or selective on the paraeducators who had the highest training to be part of coaching or other things like that, to be part of the process with them. So have we done a formalized, everyone has to do the same training? No, mandated training, no, we have not done that.
okay.
Nor do I have a proposal ready today to
Okay.
into my budget for
No,
that
that's
for
fine.
this year.
No, that helps that you answer the question. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And,
Yeah.
and maybe maybe it's food for thought for the future.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it.
And then the last question that was asked was, please tell about the air conditioning unit and on the cut list. Remind us if this is something that has been cut out in the past of prior year's budgets. Yes, I believe 3 years ago it was. We had to make a budget cut 3 years ago and it ended up on the cut list. That following year we brought it back and we were able to become whole, I guess, on our 5-year plan at that point. And then this year we made a determination to pull it out again. And this would have been the 5th year of a 5-year plan. So it's not in right now. We'll continue to use the portable units that are not as cost effective and are very labor intensive, but it is where we are right now, and a decision that we made to do to bring the budget as close to that line as we could. And then I had one final question from Board Member Schoenfeld, and there was just a typo to fix, and I did fix my typo on the spelling of Wadico. So that is all set on page 17.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any other questions for student services? Cinda?
Did he miss my middle question?
I actually didn't have a check mark next to it either, but I was
Okay.
making sure. So there's a question.
Oh.
It looks like maybe the related items have increased.
You want to do that? Oh, paraeducators. Yes, thank you. I apologize for that. Too much flipping of pages here. The other one was around paraeducators at Reed's Ferry School and other schools. And these are all the paraeducator salary accounts that was in question. It looks like many of these related items have increased or are tending to increase over the years about $20,000 or more. Please tell me if these increases are related to headcount or salary increases. Provided by a little more information regarding the increases. The number of paraeducators has only increased overall, really, with the influx of our additions to preschool when I come forward to the board over the years. Those have been the only increases since my tenure in this role that we've brought forward. And really, the numbers stay pretty consistently the same. However, our salaries have increased, and based on a just negotiated contract and an approved contract, there's a 3% overall increase for all of those line items coming into next year, and that's the cost. Got all of them?
All the check marks are there for me. Excellent. So are there any other questions of John?
Just a little overview about kind of
Oh yeah, absolutely. Please.
where I sit this year. I think it's important to point out that this budget's unique to the other ones because it's based on, as I said when I started, based on law. And there's two major laws that I just like to reiterate each time I come forward when I sit here, because it's more for the public and for any new members that may want to hear this spiel. First of all, my two laws are free and appropriate education, and the other one is least restrictive environment. So free and appropriate education, or FAPE, really is a law that talks about that must be available to all students, and all students have the right to an education, and they really have that. It has to be provided at public expense. It has to be provided that in conformity with the student's IEP, that's a decision made by the family along with the school, meets all the state standards, including students and disabilities that are with us that may be suspended or expelled, that it's appropriate and must be decided by a case-to-case basis with each student. It must meet all the state standards. Paper is also determined by a team, as I said, and it's important that we always include the parent and often try to include the student themselves in our decision making. And it has to be done in the least restrictive environment. In that least restrictive environment, to the maximum extent possible, has to be with children who are non-disabled. It has to happen in classes that are in our building, and it must be always have to try the regular classroom first. Each public agency must ensure that the continuum of alternative placements is available for students and families also to meet the students with disabilities in special education. There must be supplemental services provided within that classroom also. We must prepare it in conjunction with the regular class and the regular classroom placement. If an IEP team decides, a child cannot be educated in the regular classroom, even with the supplemental services, then they must consider other options: specialized classes, specialized schools, home instruction, instruction in hospitals, or instruction in other institutions. The student is required to make the school is required to make the appropriate instruction and obligations to that student and provide this to the child's based individual needs. And the services required to meet those needs in each individual setting we provide. Was there any question about those two provisions? So our numbers, I like to talk each year about our numbers, and I've been sitting here a few years, so I'm just going to quickly run through some numbers of where we sit with students identified with disability. So in 12-13, we had 685 students. In 13-14, 680. In 14-15, 676. In 15-16, 665. In 16-17, 663. In 17-18, 668. And today there are 663 current. So as you see, we have maintained pretty consistently a number of students where we are. There's been decreases, there's been increases, but overall, we've maintained that same percentage of our student population, and we stay pretty consistent with our students in there. So as we look to the budget this year, you will see that it's about 1.95% increase. And as I said, some of this increase is due to our bus transportation is in a contract year with 3.5% increase. And as I stated earlier, we have a 3% increase in our salaries for our paraeducator line items. There's also an increase you'll see in there to a cost of our occupational and speech therapy services, and that is based on actually what we spent over the last couple. And this budget will maintain the school system's educational commitment to students with identified special needs and provide a meaningful educational benefit required by federal and state regulations for all of our students. Thank you. Any other questions?
Seeing none, I think you're off the hook. Thank you very much. Very thorough answers. We appreciate the information. And we're on to item number 8, which is the update on the proposed plan for switchgear replacement at Merrimack High School. And I turn the mic over to Matt.
Thank you. Last time when we had spoke about this, in your packet was a letter from town of Merrimack, from the fire department, basically, saying that to replace the switchgear in the high school, we didn't have enough clearance in that area. We needed 42 inches in the front and 42 inches in the back. So over the time period between that meeting and this meeting, Tom Tussaud, myself, I can't name all the people who were in that conference room, but John Manueli was there in the fire department, Rick Jones, code enforcement, and a bunch of other people from the fire department had a meeting in the conference room to discuss this. and at the fire station. We also had Dean Sotokaropoulos, gotta say that again, Chief State Electrical Inspector there. So the state electrical inspector was there also to give his opinion, because John thought it prudent to look at this, seeing that we were just missing the mark of the new code by a few inches, if the state would perhaps grant us some sort of waiver or something like that. So in the end, the state asked the question, Gene, the dean, the chief state electrical inspector, was the new switchgear configured such that you needed access to the back of the panel? And the answer was no. So, therefore, we can place the switchgear anywhere in that room, give us at least 42 or maybe more inches in front for access, because we're not accessing the back of the switchgear. We would build a little wall next to it so no one could go back there and get trapped. I guess that was the concern with the fire department. If somebody, or that's why the code was written. If somebody were to go behind there and it was, let's say, 24 inches and that's it, and there was a failure of the switchgear, they could get caught back there and the fire department would have a hard time getting to them. But if you take away access to the back, seeing that we don't need access to the back, and we have more than enough room for front access to the switchgear. So what we thought was a, ending the project in its entirety type problem turned out not to be. But during that meeting, Dean, the chief state electrical inspector, he made that statement. Then he kind of made a recommendation which made a lot of sense to us, and something that we're going forward with. We've hired an electrical engineer to do a load assessment of that current switchgear to see if we really need 4,000 volts coming into the building. Now, the reason why we have 4,000 volts is that building years ago used to be electric heat. So there's a lot of juice coming into that building. So do we really need one that is 4,000 volts? But we've had a conversation, taking into account some of the plans that I heard the board talk about with Honeywell and ventilation, we have to factor that in. If in the future you want to put additional ventilation or perhaps air conditioning systems, maybe we do need that. However, that's what the engineer is going to determine. So if it's 3,000 volts, we'll take care of today and into the future. Perhaps that's what we'll look at. And the best plan would be to do the switchgear at the same time we're doing the transformer, and that would be during the summertime. So, because the connections on the transformer might not line up with the new positioning of the switchgear, and it's best to do it as one cohesive project, from inside the building, going outside to the building to the new transformer, and then routing everything up to the pole where the main feed is. So it's in process. The electrical engineering load assessment study is going to be happening. We already had one meeting with the engineering firm. Ackroyd Engineering is the name of the company. And they're going to be putting what they do is they put their equipment on our equipment, and then they measure the peaks and the loads. Because when you start up a building, first thing Monday morning, and it's like 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whenever all the systems kick on to bring the temperature up, there's a peak there. It's like if you have a generator at your house and your generator's rated for 5,500 watts. When your furnace kicks on and your well pump kicks on, if you're on private water, and then somebody throws the microwave on, that generator's going to trip because there's a surge, initial startup charge into everything. But if you bring everything up in a slow, deliberate fashion, you cannot reach that 5,500 watts or 6,000 watts, however big the generator is, or 12,000 watts, those of us who are lucky enough to have like the whole house units. So that's what we want to find out. What's the peak? What's the startup voltage needed? And to kind of look at everything in concert with Eversource to do a design all the way through. So everything is fitting together and everything is designed and ready to go together. And Custom Electric was there also at that meeting. So we'll coordinate all this with Custom, with the fire department, with our engineer, and with Eversource. So, but that's what we're looking, that's the plan right now. So the motion that you made for us to access the money, we're going to still need that in this fiscal year.
Okay.
Because we have to put a down payment on the switchgear piece. And so we'll be using that money in this fiscal year and next fiscal year too.
Okay. And Andy, was your hand up in the corner? My eye?
So that was actually the question I was going to ask, because it's interesting because the switchgear you asked to be funded out of the emergency fund this fiscal year, and the transformer replacement is in your proposed budget for the next fiscal year.
Mhm.
So my first question was going to be, do you need all of the $110,000? I think that's what it was. This fiscal year, if all you're putting is a down payment on it, or does some of it go into next year, and does it change your budget amount for the next fiscal year? Because the reason I'm asking is because you would drain $110,000 out of our emergency fund. The question
Yes.
is, do you need all of that so that we have an emergency fund that is a little more robust until we get into next fiscal year?
Well, we would perhaps, if we're going with the 4,000 watt switchgear, we have two prices right now, and they're around $110,000. So we would need to spend that money out of the fund, regardless which fiscal year it's in.
No, but if you were going to plan the replacement in the next fiscal year, you could, because there's switchgear in the budget.
This
For the other one.
switchgear for the upper elementary
What I'm
school.
saying is that from a prudent budgeting perspective, would you reduce the amount you take out of the emergency fund and formally plan a portion into the next fiscal year so we budget it and we don't drain the emergency account?
Well, that would entail increasing the amount we have budgeted.
I know, but I know at the end of the day, it's the same dollar amount.
Which, yeah,
But let's say we have Superstorm Sandy come through in April, and you've taken all $110,000 out. Maybe you didn't need all the 110 this fiscal year. It'd be good to have some of that money in the emergency fund just in case, and formally plan. I mean, I know it means increasing the budget for next year, but it's a more mindful way to plan it. I mean, that's what I'm asking.
Well,
I'll stop my sentence.
At this point in time, I don't think we're thinking about, because the budget as it stands right now is more than the default budget. We're not thinking about any other increases. So I would rather utilize the emergency fund, maybe plan for a warrant article next year to ask for 200,000 to replace, to replenish, and build that fund back up as a warrant article, and just keep the $110,000 coming out of the emergency fund as was previously voted on.
Okay, and just to your point earlier, I think you were mentioning about the potential for failure and that you're experiencing trouble being able to operate and maintain it because of a lever.
Yes.
And so with that, you're running a risk of not being able to get those things supported in the immediate time frame.
Correct.
Okay, so thanks. Did you have another question?
Well, I want to talk this a little bit further because you said there's a time frame for when this thing needs to be built. So if that thing died tomorrow, we'd be
Then we would-
SOL for some period of time.
We would dip into the fund and.
No,
we would-
but
yeah,
I mean,
Right.
but the switchgear can't be created overnight. There's a lead
Correct.
time to create it, which I can't remember what the general is. It's months, right?
2 months.
2 months
and a
to
half
do
months?
that, right?
Right.
So doing a down payment to get a switchgear started, once you understand how big it needs to be, makes perfect sense because
Correct.
then you have it in your hands as soon as it's need be. But the 110,000 included the installation of it. Is that
Yes.
correct? Right. What I'm saying is, I understand what you said, that you didn't want to increase next year's budget. You didn't want to add items into next year's budget. But
Yep.
in the same breath, we're talking about a petition warrant or a warrant article to increase the amount we put back into the emergency fund, right?
Well, a warrant article that would perhaps be put forward from the board, not a
From surplus.
petition.
Well,
from
right.
surplus.
Not
Right, but
It-
I'm also concerned that if the budget doesn't get voted yes, and we put a deposit on something and didn't buy it outright, and
That's-
finish the project, what happens if the budget goes down?
I don't
Is
have
that
the money.
you don't have the money and we have a deposit in place?
I know. I wanted to talk this through because you're now spanning fiscal year and you're talking about needing all of it, but yet it's contingent on installation with a piece of equipment that if it's in next year's budget and the budget gets voted down, you've got, I can't remember the amount for the transformer, but it's, what is it?
70,000.
$70,000. You'd have to figure out where to come up with that money to do it the right way. See, this is you said that you need the transformer at the same time as you do the switchgear.
This would be a good plan to do if everything fell into place.
So if it died in April and you had the switchgear there, you would replace it without touching the transformer.
We would have to do something to replace it without touching the transfer. That's correct.
I'll stop, only because some of it is money across budgeting cycles. Some of it's our emergency
Right.
fund and all that. It's all intertwined together. I want to make sure that we really understand what it is, what you're going to do to make sure that, because there's still an outstanding motion to allow you to take the whole 110. I'm almost tempted to have you understand what it is you really need before we allow that to happen in consent or whatever we were going to do.
We voted on
You
it.
voted.
We voted on it?
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
Yep.
Decided not to put it on consent and took a vote.
That's right.
last
We
time.
took a vote. So I guess the question is if you don't need that much. Well, we said up to.
Up
Never
to.
mind.
We
Yeah,
did.
you gave me an up to and you voted for it. So
It's fine. It's
I'm not going to spend any more than I need
no,
to.
no. I know.
Yeah.
It's a little confusing what you said.
Yes.
And the good news, we can replace it.
I apologize if I wasn't clear. I'm
No,
sorry.
no. It's complex. Even for, I mean, if I'm been watching this, I'm trying to put it all together.
Right.
Let alone somebody that's just watching this meeting for the
Right.
first time.
Right.
So I'd like to understand, if you're going to take the money out, what the proposal that you have for a warrant article to build the emergency fund back up. I mean, that's something we're going to talk about when we get the warrant articles, right?
Yeah.
We do that
That's
to understand the impact of that stuff and understand whether, if the budget did not pass and we replace the switchgear, how you would address the transformer issue, since they are now linked together.
well.
You don't have to answer that now,
Yeah, I know. Okay.
but it's
So I
important.
won't.
Right. But I'm saying is, but it's the extra wrinkle that you threw into it,
Yes.
is the transformer is tied to it.
Yes.
So understand, if we can do it without the transformer was one piece, and if we want to do it the right way, but the budget doesn't pass, how you'd go about addressing it.
Right.
Cindy, your hand was up?
Well, like others at the table, I'm trying to put my head around the various pieces and wondering if there was, the possibility that it could be in the default budget if we were making a deposit and we had a contractual obligation. Would the default budget cover?
Well, if you're talking about the 110, that's money that you've already authorized to spend.
Correct.
So it's not even budgeted money. So it's money you have the authority to spend with or without another vote. It doesn't have to be budgeted,
Okay,
because that's what the purpose of the fund was.
right.
And you're the agents to expend.
But wasn't there the other piece that if, what are we talking about if it doesn't get voted in April?
Well, if we put the money in the budget in April does not get voted in, that money is not available to us in that fiscal year. So if we basically plan the project where we would put a deposit down with emergency funds to say get some of the foundation work done, and then pay the balance as Andy was saying with 2019 2020 money. If the budget gets voted down, it's a one-time expense. That money wouldn't be available to us. So technically, we still have the 110,000. It would just get drained, and we would do it in this year. Or we could say we'd like to keep our savings in our savings account and put it in next year. But if the budget gets voted down, we don't have that.
But in that case, then we could try
The
to do another
110
vote.
still.
We could do another vote. Like if, let's say we rescinded that, let's say we voted to withdraw that option, the 110,000 if we wanted to, right? Or is that not even relevant?
Well, we could. I think we can re-vote on something if we felt that there was material reason to do so. But I would hesitate doing so, honestly, as a personal position. But
So what's the recommended path?
I think
Confused.
right now, we're doing the load assessment study. That's going to size the switchgear. If it comes back that it's 4,000 volts is what we need, which is what we have now, to take us into this year and for future plans that boards may have for ventilation and air conditioning, that's what we would do. The cost of that is $110,000. I'd like to have access to those funds so I could sign a contract for $110,000, knowing that I have, even though it goes into next fiscal.
Gotcha.
See, it's coming from, that's reserve money, it's coming from reserve money. And let's say the budget fails and the $70,000 is not in the default budget. Or we choose to reduce the budget by $411,000 and we're going to take $70,000 out of the budget for the transformer. Then, you would just do the switchgear without doing the transformer.
Okay.
Or you'd have to decide whether something else in the budget you wouldn't do.
You wouldn't do
and
to
do
pay for that.
To pay for that,
Right.
right?
If it fails, then we go to default, and then it's a matter of how we allocate that.
How you rearrange the pieces on the board.
That's in the year that the default budget the budget got voted down, we went to default. We had to trade off we kicked the can down the road on the heat wheel
Yes.
and did the track that particular year
We got
because it
lucky
was,
with-
and we did the heat wheel was the following year. Yeah.
and then we had a kind of a cash gain with was it with insurance or something like that we had?
You did the chiller. You did the heat.
I think she's asking about our guaranteed maximum rate that year wasn't.
Well, we somehow were able to get the track in that year.
But that was through the budgeted amount, though.
But I felt
Yes.
like we had kind of
No.
a surprise that.
No,
No.
well, at the end there was that health trust reimbursed, but that from a budgeting perspective, it was the budget got voted down. Default budget was less. We had to trade something off. We traded off the heat wheel, and it fell into next year's operating budget.
Correct.
And we did the track during that particular year. That's
Yes.
But all in all, I understand what you're saying, that if it were to fail, then we go to default and we figure out how we would need to allocate.
Yeah, you look at the transformer, you figure this is perhaps something that we would like to do at the same time, and then you have choices, if that would be one of your choices.
Excellent.
But having access to the 110 right now allows me, whoever we choose, we probably have like a third party come in, but it's all hovering around that same price, no matter where we look, So it'd be nice to have the authority to spend the money to sign the contract to get the job done. because that's where the issue is.
And I did have a comment kind of about if you're looking at the 4,000 watt usage. I know you're talking about that was put in place because we had electric heat at the time, but we also probably didn't have parts of laptops either.
Well, that's the other
So
story.
I was going to say, is Nancy going to get kind of an advisory role in this as far as technological needs?
Oh, absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So we probably traded one for another over a period of time, but just transitioned slowly. So.
Yeah, correct. In fact, yeah, we did have that conversation with the engineer. You know, things that have changed since 1970, whenever it was, 77.
When Andy was here.
Yes, when Andy was here.
That's
Things-
exactly how the meeting was. When Andy was here, how was... Excellent.
Life before Andy, life after Andy.
Exactly.
Correct.
So, yes, there you go. Excellent. So if there are any questions or feedback, I'm sure we'll see each other tomorrow night. But
I'll keep the board obviously appraised.
course,
and
you've
the
been very good.
superintendent of everything here.
no concerns at all there. So unless there are any other questions, we're on to number 9, which is the review of 4th grade National Assessment Educational Progress NAEP Mathematics and Reading Student Questionnaires, Surveys, and Parent Notification Letters. And I turn the mic over to what's left of Mark, who's been hanging on very well tonight.
There's a little bit left.
A little bit left.
So
The tissue pile is
there we
gone.
go. So I'm going to start. I'm going to start with some acronyms. So NAEP is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and that is the nationally conducted assessment that contributes to the nation's report card that gets issued annually, which talks about the achievement of students from state to state and nationally on reading and math. NAEP is administered by the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES, which is a branch of the U.S. Department of Education. So every year, the NAEP and the U.S. DOE randomly select districts in each state and then randomly select schools within each district in each state, or rather, not each district, but randomly select districts within each state to participate in some grade 4, 8, or 12 in reading or math for the NAEP. And again, the statistics that are gathered from the NAEP assessment contribute to the nation's report card on how students are doing in general in reading and math. This year, our 4th grade at Mastrocola Elementary School was randomly selected to participate in the NAEP assessment in both reading and math. So there are 2 components of this. One is the assessment itself, which is takes approximately 120 minutes. It's administered by representatives from the U.S. Department of Education who actually come to the selected districts to administer the test, the assessment, rather. A couple of important things to share. Student grades are not affected. It has nothing to do with student grades whatsoever. Students may be excused for any reason and are not required to complete the assessment and may skip any question. The other component of the experience is a survey, and the survey is intended to provide the U.S. Department of Education with additional information about a variety of things, like whether there are computers in the home, whether or not students use calculators when they do their homework, whether they have access to that kind of technology, whether they read every day, those kinds of things. So I want to be clear about this because it's very important. The survey component of this is an opt-in, which means that parents are given a letter and they are able to say, I choose for my child to participate in this, or I do not choose it. So they actively engage in choosing to be part of the survey that asks those questions. The part of the experience that relates to the academic content questions in reading and math is an opt-out. What that means is, unless we, the school, hear from you and say we don't want to participate, we will assume that you do. So the survey part is opt-in. A parent has to actually make an effort to say we will allow our child to opt into the survey component. The content assessment in reading and math is an opt-out, which is that unless we hear from you, we'll assume that you're going to do it unless you actually opt out. The assessment is due to be administered, excuse me, on February 20th. And parents will be receiving a letter this week that will allow them to have information about the assessment and the survey component. And that letter will also indicate what the NAEP data contributes to, which is an aggregate of all the data collected from all the participating students at a particular grade nationwide that contributes to the nation's report card, which is released annually, that just gives people an update about how students at a particular grade in the country are doing in reading and math at a particular grade. So I'm happy to take any particular questions you might have.
I know a couple clarifiers. The first thing is I think that it's not up for a vote. We don't need to vote because it's a federal requirement and it's going to happen. So we'll just start with that and then now open up for questions. And Brandy, I saw.
When the letter goes out to parents, will they receive a copy of these questions that will be asked, or a version of it before they opt in?
I don't believe so, no. They would just be allowed the opportunity to, because it's a fairly lengthy, so the mailing for that would be pretty costly. But there is, what will go home with the letter is the opt-in letter, which describes the experience and tries to summarize what it is that they're allowing their students to do or not to do.
And will they receive at the end, is it anonymous as
Yes.
well? It is, okay. And then will the parents then nobody will receive any information after the test? Okay.
I want to thank you for asking that. I want to be really clear about that. None whatsoever.
Okay.
Thank you, yeah.
Andy?
So, I understand. So the assessment part is opt out, and then the questionnaire is opt in. In front of us in the packet, there's two letters that are, I believe, both are intended to be sent home. One of them describes the assessment, and at the bottom it says that you have to let Michelle know, or the principal, Michelle, it comes from her, Michelle Remain, know in writing by January 18th if you don't want them to participate. So it verbally says you contact us proactively to opt out. The questionnaire is a separate letter that describes it and gives the name and the parent and says the child will or will not participate. So it's the opt-in methodology, right? Was there any thought to combining these two into one to talk about the assessment and the questionnaire and allowing the opt-out and the opt-ins to be in the same letter? The only reason I'm saying is usually when we do things, it's one or the other. And to have an activity have both opt-in and opt-out at the same time is it's something I wasn't aware of until you described it. So, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how we can streamline the process a little bit to let that flow a little bit smoother. Or maybe there's precedent set that this is the way the schools do it. I don't know.
I think it's that. We take guidance and the directions that are provided to us by the NCES, the National Center for Educational Statistics, which is again part of the U.S. Department of Ed, and they provide really a script almost, for how that's to run and what are the important pieces of information that get sent home to parents. And so my understanding is that that's the way they do it, because they want to be very clear that there are two separate operations here. One is you don't have to take the survey, and in fact, if you want to take the survey, you have to actively say, I want them to take the survey. Whereas the other is we are going to administer the content test unless we hear from you.
Right.
So I think that's just how they do it.
So to sort of answer, you had the question. So my next question was, we have copies of both of these questionnaires, right? Which are the survey. On the first letter, what talks about the assessment itself, it does say, for more information about the survey questionnaires, it gives a web page. Does that web page have these two questionnaires or surveys on it so that parents can read the questions there?
I have bet to that, and I believe the answer is no. I think it is it's descriptive of what the survey questions are descriptive of, rather than if the question is, do you go to that site and then you see all the survey questions? I think the answer to that is no. I think if you click that link, you would get descriptions about the kinds of questions that are asked in the survey. That's what I believe is the case.
Okay.
So the difference being what you're describing is you would actually see all the survey questions and then use that to base your decision on whether you would opt in. And what I'm saying is I don't think that that's what you get. I think you could go to that and you could get descriptions of the kinds of questions that get asked. And based on those generalized descriptions, you would make the decision.
Would there be any objection to maybe having it at the school? So if a parent really wanted the information prior to agreeing to this, that they could go to the front office and review a copy? Or is there another option for parents just to be able to view some of the random questions that might be asked before agreeing to it? Is that doable?
So because this is not administered in any way by the local district, I wouldn't have the authority to answer that question. I certainly could find out. I could call, or I could make some effort to try to be in touch with whoever the representative would be and ask if that could be possible. I could do that, but I wouldn't be able to say, yes, sure, we can do that, because that might be a violation of something that NAEP,
right.
Some violation of some policy or procedure that NAEP has in place.
Fair enough. I just, as a mom, I would, before I would sign my child up for doing something, I probably would want just to have some clarity surrounding what types of questions, even though I know it's anonymous and even though I'm not going to receive any of the feedback, especially at fourth grade, I would probably be more inclined to want to know what some of those questions might be. So if there was an opportunity to provide that to a parent, or at least make it available as an available option, maybe they wouldn't even show up for that, but at least as a district, if we could provide it without breaking any of the rules and regulations surrounding the distribution of this, that would be great.
So I certainly can follow up.
Awesome.
And find out.
Thank you.
Excellent. So item number 10 is establishing the date and backup date for the district deliberative session, and I turn it over to Marge.
Thank you. So first, I'm going to ask all of you have a flip calendar in front of you, which is very nice, provided for the town council. And I'm going to have you look at March, if you would, and have you look at the first week in March. And I will tell you that on the night of the 4th, you have a school board meeting. I'm going to recommend to you that the deliberative session be Tuesday the 5th. the 6th is Ash Wednesday, and I believe that Our Lady of Mercy Church will definitely want the church parking lot in the full for Ash Wednesday.
Yes, it's
And
usually
that-
about 7 o'clock as
Yeah.
well. So
And that the backup date, in case of inclement weather, would be Thursday the 7th. The other reason I chose the 5th too is without Naomi here, I believe Tuesday nights are good for her because she's on the budget committee, and I know just that's a good night. So I just need you to weigh in and let me know if that's doable so I can notify all the parties.
are there any questions on the 5th so far? Excellent. And I believe the following week, the town will be having their deliberative session. So we go first. I think 12th or 13th. I can't remember, but the second week, definitely. Excellent. So I think we are good to go unless otherwise notified. And I will plan not to travel this year, so that didn't go well. Yeah. So on to item number 11, which is the approval of December 17th, 2018 minutes, the housekeeping. So I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes. Made by Andy, seconded by Cinda. Any edits? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. It's our only vote tonight so far. And on to item number 12, which is consent with Mark.
So on consent, tonight we have 2 educator nominations. Cassandra Early, school counselor, Mastrocola Elementary School, and Paul Marshall, science teacher at Merrimack High School. And in addition, we have the approval for Christine Tebow to conduct the educator survey for doctoral study.
Cinda,
I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
seconded by Andy. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. On to item number 13, other. Is there any correspondence to come before the board? I did receive a question from a parent. I redirected him to the principal of the school where the child resides, and I believe there have been conversations already to address specific student issues. Are there any other bits of correspondence? Seeing none, comments? Andy.
So at the beginning of the meeting, Mr. Gwynn was here, giving his input on the budget process and stuff. And first, I'd like to say I like when people come and give public comment because we get too little of it, I think, at the board. But on the other hand, there's a lot of questions that he had that we may have material that we've answered, like the planning around like some of the Honeywell planning and the process of the way we go out for bids and some of the discussions. So one of the questions I have, and I struggle with this on the when I was looking for something on the district webpage, is where we can find old presentations that were done to the board or handouts or things like that. Because there's a lot of material that we could point to readily that we've had as a board over the past year or so that might help if a question like this came up. So I don't really want an answer. It's just I may be looking to say, is there a file cabinet someplace that's more readily available that we can find some of these things that have been done in the past that we can share with people like Mr. Gwynn if they have questions and things like that.
And I also share your sentiment about it's nice to have the public come and speak with us. And I do hope that we always provide a welcoming table. I want to give some clarity to how public participation works based on tonight's events. And we do use public participation to solicit input from the community. Other than the one clarifier that I provide that our reduction in force for teachers is caused directly by enrollment and not by budget cuts. We, as a policy and for good practice, don't engage in deliberation when those constituents come to the table. It's important for us to deliberate as a board and have discussions as a board with posted agenda items. So when people do come before us and you see us not responding, I want you to know it's not out of disrespect that we don't respond. It's out of we don't have a posted agenda item to really talk about it. And the community coming to the table would create a conversation that no one else would have insight that would be happening. And so we want to do things transparently. The other thing it creates what I would call almost a bit of a consequence. Although I did do that one clarifier, which is not my typical, as you're quite aware. I don't want the lack of response to be considered a confirmation of the accuracy of the commentary. I think that that's done through deliberation and board discussion on agenda items. I think there are some inaccuracies tonight. And I think that that being said, I think that we do a very good job as a district to vet research of all people to research. A school district is going to be the best student at researching. So I don't want there to be the understanding that we just take the first vendor attached to them and buy their stuff. So I do worry that that's going to be the understanding that the public gets from us, our lack of response during these agenda items. But I think they're still valuable. But I just want to kind of frame what you see on camera and what it means.
Right, that's why I said there's information about the bidding process and stuff we've been
course.
presented before, so. But she's got her hand raised, so.
Marge? So I just think it's important for you to know, if you don't, that after the last board meeting, Matt and Tom met with Mr. Gwynn at length to talk in terms of the roofing process and how decisions are made. And there was, I believe you met for at least 2 hours. So for the information that you're referring to, I would be happy to have it provided if I knew exactly what bits of material you would be interested in having. And usually what happens is everything is kind of held together by what board meeting it was at. So we go back, that's how things are filed as compared to having a topic. So if you knew it was a year ago that we were talking about roofing or whatever, then we would go back and try and call those out. We just thought it was more important where he had displayed interest in building specifically with a focus on roofing, for him to understand the process that is employed, for him to have an opportunity to interact with Tom Tuso, given that that's who, you know, has really overseen the 11 acres of roofs for the past years and so on. And I believe it was a pretty full discussion.
If I could just have a brief commentary. It was probably around 3 hours in my office. Mr. Gwynn brought his roofer with him. We had Scott Livanor from Garland Manufacturing there to explain what their product is and how it's applied. Tom was there, myself was there, and, you know, it was a good 3 hours. It was a good discussion. So perhaps we need to answer some more questions, or I could look for some more documentation as far as when we made the switch to the roof with the 40-year warranty as opposed to the 10-year roofs. So that's something I could look at. In fact, Mr. Gwynn's roofer was interested in becoming Garland certified at that point in time. So Scott was going to reach out to him.
Marge?
Another thing I was thinking about, and I'm only sharing this because I think it shows our seriousness of purpose, is I remember when we went before the planning board at one time, you might remember this, one of the members of the planning board, Desiree Fault, asked a lot of questions about roofing and how we go about it, and this was a presentation that Matt was doing. And immediately after, we asked her to come forward because, again, she had knowledge about roofing, and we can always learn something. And after she met with Tom and Matt and saw the process that was employed and so on, she assured the planning board that she felt that we were going about it in a very methodical way. So it might be helpful to have someone that we go before, Desiree Fault, to also sit at our table. It's another voice and a person who has
She
in.
was,
So
and she
I'm
was on
just-
the commercial industrial side, and she was also a principal engineer.
Right. My comment was large. I didn't want to really debate this at the table as much, but that's fine. It's a good,
Yeah.
healthy conversation. My point is that to get to your point, Marge, about things that are filed based on the meeting versus the topic. I can't remember when a meeting was, even sometimes what year we discuss things based on what. So it might be a good activity for us to consider is to being able to also find a way to cross-reference by a topic area for presentations. Like I was looking for the presentation I did on the Brentwood building because my system died in between, so I didn't have a copy. I couldn't find an easy place to get it. I couldn't remember the meeting where it would have showed up. So I found it in an email. But it was an example to me, and it was brought forth, sort of amplified tonight, that if we could find a way to have topic-based place to put some of these presentations, we don't have to go back in time, but in the future, if we could sort of do a cross-reference, it might be helpful. But
I've searched minutes and I've searched agendas to dig back myself.
right, but
But
sometimes you
yeah.
can't find the pieces, the files.
Yep.
But the other piece, to the point about the roofing, the piece I think that we got to make clear is we go out to bid on all the stuff that we do with specifications of what it is we need.
Right.
So if a vendor can come in at a third of the cost and meet all of our criteria, they're more than welcome to bid on the project, and we would look at those things. I mean, this is not as though we've got a vendor in our back pocket and we go and we use them every time. We have certain specifications and warranty and things that we need, and we go out to bid, and people bid. That's the way we do business, transparently.
Yeah.
So and publicly. And I think that it's important because I don't think it was an intent, but it made it sound as though we're out spending willy-nilly taxpayers' dollars without doing our diligence and putting things out to bid, which is certainly not true.
Well, there is a product there that we prefer that is a proven product and has a 40-year warranty. We had to replace the middle school roof after 12
Right.
years.
But the point is
and just,
go ahead.
just one more thing. And in order to become a certified installer, you have to have at least 10 years experience installing flat roof systems, primarily their flat roof system under a training program. You have to have impeccable credit so you can meet your bills. You have to be certified from them, and you have to have an annual volume from your roofing crew of at least $10 million a year in growth roofing projects. So we're not dealing with a company that is hasn't been around for a while or doesn't do large commercial. They're working with the entire school district of Concord, right?
But the point, I understand all that, but the point
Yeah.
is there's a certain criteria we put out for bids
Yes.
to do this. And I think
Yes.
that's the
And
important
we
piece
have
to take
actual
away.
walkthroughs
Because,
where they
no,
they
right,
get
right. But
yeah.
without going down, we have process to do the bids for the quality of the roof that we need to withstand 40 years and to have a company stand behind what's installed so they're there and be able to do it. We've talked about it in the past. So I think
Yes.
that was my point of the takeaway, not to debate the roof, but to talk about for anything that we do,
Right.
whether it's a switch gear or a boiler or whatever, we go through that process.
Absolutely.
So, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? I'm going to close with one. So over the weekend, Ted Comstock, who was for decades the director of the New Hampshire School Boards Association, retired June of 2017, passed away from after brief illness. He's been a very good supporter of this district, recruited me to the board, and he will be greatly missed. So thank you. And we are on to item number 14, new business.
I'm going to tell you two things. First, our scribe, Trish, who you've noticed had very fine minutes in the last few weeks, just broke her wrist, and she's going to be out of commission for over a month. So I'm pleased to tell you that Rose DiNucci is going to pick up and fill the gap. And so it's kind of nice to have two scribes. But I want you to know about Trish because we've recently complimented her on how well she's done the minutes. Secondly, today, Julie DeLuca, John Fabrizio, Mark McLaughlin, and I attended a session at the Department of Education entitled New Hampshire Student Wellness Information and Listening Session. This was sponsored by the commissioner. It was specifically on social emotional learning skills. It was an invited guest list, including people from the House, the Senate, Reaching Higher New Hampshire, Cornerstone, a variety of people that he felt strongly should all be gathered at once to have a full disclosure about what is going on relative to social emotional learning skills. And I am pleased to tell you that Laconia and Merrimack were highlighted for their work by the Department of Ed, and that Julie and John did a very admirable job. So to know that happened.
Thank you, Marge. And I'm sorry John wasn't here to see it, but I hope he rolls tape. So we're very appreciative of his effort above and beyond these district walls. So on to item number 15, committee reports. Are there any committee reports? I know it's been the holidays. Expected very little. Excellent. On to item number 16, public comments on agenda items. The room is empty, so we're going to close it. We're going to take a moment to sign the manifest, and I will entertain a motion to go into non-public session per RSA 91-3-A:3, Roman numeral 2, section C. Do I have a motion made by Andy? Second? Seconded by Cinda. Brandy, how do you vote?
In favor.
Cinda?
In favor.
Andy?
In favor.
And I vote in favor. The motion carries 4-0-0. Thank you and good night.